Start living. We're living. Okay, good. It's looking better now that we've rebooted here. Video is smooths. We don't have our... Where's our Telegram chat? Telegram. Alright. So, we just had some technical difficulties. We've got a start of about 10 minutes in which we tried to kind of introduce context here.
Windows crashed.
So we're going to try to do that again. I'm still going to have to set up some chat stuff here, but we're just going to proceed here. We don't know for sure, as usual, the title of this dev meeting, but we're hoping for How to Not Be Stupid as the title.
Yeah.
Very clickbaity, and you can, of course, give our disclaimers.
So reiterating that if you don't feel like you are in the category of being stupid, this is not going to be for you. We are in that category, so we are going to proceed with discussing a way of getting out of that paper bag in the corner that we find ourselves in. So that's the long and short of it, really. You can proceed to shut off the press the stop button or whatever, or link off.
If you're not stupid.
As soon as the idea of being stupid is hurting your feelings.
But we are, and we claim to all be on the spectrum.
Yes.
Somewhere.
And we discussed the spectrum. It's the spectrum of solipsism and objectivism on the one extreme and the other, respectively. Right.
Yep.
And if you land somewhere between being an objective individual versus a subjective individual, you are both. And on the spectrum, that's the general outline of that picture. And
we went into this in great detail the last a couple of streams ago.
Yeah, exactly, a couple of streams ago.
The spectrum of stupidity, it was called.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So
are you on the spectrum?
So somewhere between, do you see yourself as more of an objective and in your apprehensions, or subjective?
So
either way, you're making a fatal mistake, likely, which we all do, and which is natural and normal. And there's a very fine line, which is not to get stuck in these assumptions that we make, and be open to always.
Let's bring it
changing.
A little bit less abstract and into a more concrete demonstration of what that looks like. On the objective spectrum side of the spectrum, we have the atheist. And on the subjective, we have the theist. If you need a more clear picture on what that looks like in real life, so this is kind of what you get. And then, of course, you have a mixture of what that looks like within those groups. You can have quote-unquote spiritual atheists, which are more on the subjective part and solipsistic side, and then you have your outright logic philosophers, which are from the solipsistic side, trying to merge with the objective side and trying to argue their first cause principles and whatever else you have, and that's
right.
Fun. So either way, both land on the same spectrum of stupidity.
Right. And so it's an important subject or topic, because this is how we make sense of the world around us. And of course, if we're going to talk about a system like the Guild, or like our work with Portal Mountain and this kind of stuff, there are some integral skills to kind of be aware of or develop, which many probably already have and all that, to dealing with this either objectivism or subjectivism in their extremes, in which one kind of clings to their reality as being truth.
Right,
in some ways,
reality tunnel.
So in other words, the mind, as it constructs reality for you, gets tricked into thinking that is the reality that it's projecting upon, right?
What behind that trick, there's a more subtle trick of the mind that I don't think we've explicitly touched on. And that is the trick of the mind that we've had a discussion about faith and truth. The trick of the mind is a transformation of an arbitrary faith in something into a truth without the corresponding feedback.
Right.
And so
Right.
when that jump happens without any of the feedback observational
Yes.
input,
Right.
so it's like an autopiloted construct.
And it's normal for you to have faith in the things that your own mind creates for you. That's totally normal.
Unquestioning, yes.
Right. So
And this touches on discipline, because if that was constructed without any kind of discipline, it can be very arbitrary.
right. And the discipline essentially here that we've been discussing and talking about, the feedback observation tracking method, is to when you enact faith and observe a truth, that has to feed back into your original faith understandings.
Or
So
either confirm it or contradict it.
right,
For
and
example.
be paying close attention to the edge cases and the boundaries, and like
Right.
yeah, it's ambiguous. Like life is kind of
Because
ambiguous.
sometimes what faith produces a truth in one moment, and it produces a falsehood in another moment.
Right.
And so, what is the observational feedback that we can track out of that? Again, if that doesn't get reified in the process in any way, then we are stuck in a problem where the faith has a meaningless jump to the truth. And
Right.
when that jump happens, this is where you get argumentation with regard to reality, because a reality is essentially a set of what we would call truths. Right? Here we go. Let's appropriate this term right here, right now, to make it meaningful. A reality is a set of truths that is operational at any given moment.
Right.
Given our definition of truth in its relationship to
Yeah.
faith, and with or without the feedback observation tracking happening in between the two.
Right.
So-
And so these truths, truth statements, I guess you could say, come through like faith statements. Like the faith soundbite is really all that we have to go by, in that you do this and this will happen or something, and that's kind of true. The truth emerges from the activity of the soundbite.
So when the truth emerges not from the feedback of any particular soundbite, but rather supplied by yet another soundbite, so it kind of undermines the effort.
Right.
Undermine.
Right.
And this undermining is basically what would be called non-awareness. So if we were to discuss awareness in the context of this discussion as a domain of progress, awareness would constitute the ability to track the progression from faith to truth. There you go.
You're talking about in like a participant sense,
It doesn't matter which
or any.
because the thing that changes with, so you're referring to coherence in this case.
Yeah, and the domains of progress.
So the relationship between the domain of progress is that in each level of coherence that you are stepping through, you're going to go through the domains of progress in their entirety until your awareness of the next layer is established, right? Which repeats the process, because the insight at the end of the in the end of the domains of progress allows you to become aware of the next layer. So in the case of participation to membership, that can be described essentially as you become aware that this is something that is self-beneficial to yourself, like to yourself to do. Your insight at the end of that progression becomes that of being aware of other people going through the exact same thing, that you are not alone, that you are part of a larger picture, and that it becomes the next layer of established, and being aware of that makes one a member in that group, right? Hence the jump from coherence into mere participation in something that seems great to being a member of that thing and nothing else, if you will, in the mental makeup. That awareness allows one to establish a new ground, a new form of coherence with the other members at that point. It might be still blurry, it might be still murky to go through what that means, but this is the first layer, domain of progress. The next one is the accountability to that awareness. The next one is the discipline that comes from that accountability, and of course the insight in that nothing. Well, mastery is.
Right. So
mastery is more about
you're kind
being able to relay that back to.
You're walking
the
through
participant.
a whole kind of structure of the guild of increasing coherence. So it's something
what
that
coherence feels like from the internal perspective. Yes.
Right. So I kind of feel like I want to just step back a little bit and. So we've talked a lot about that, we brought up the degrees of coherence, the domains of progress, all these kind of, what happens when you encounter the guild, what it looks like, what people are doing, what they're up to, and you're like, hey, that looks, wholesome. Let's have some wholesome friends and all that.
So even more backdrop to that, what I was hoping to get to with that description is what is unfolding. What domains of progress are a description of something that is unfolding in another context.
Right. So, and we were talking about the agitation of the metastability of the breakaway civilization itself.
Yes, this is behind the scenes.
So yes, just to step back a little bit. We have discussed a lot also in the past of this live stream series. The civilizational, the chronology of civilization, as we've called it, this stepping through this build-up of externalization and commodification kind of out into the ether of civilization, and the person, the individual, becomes just kind of a
cog in that machine,
an agent which knows how to interact with that in various ways, and yes, a cog, because you don't really have control of what's outside.
Well, as soon as if we remember the description of how you interface with the system as a whole, is that you have a very limited set of levers and buttons you can push against it, and fill out this form, talk to this other agent, just do things in the abstract world in a certain way. To just not be punished or to get some kind of reward. So you're interfaced with the entire process is entirely abstract and out there with these, and oftentimes if you try to step outside of that, you end up stepping on the toes of somebody else who's trying not to get the punishments from the same mechanism, with slightly different buttons, slightly different levers that they have access to, metaphorically speaking, of course.
Right. True, yeah. So we that kind of, you're probably leading to the fact that we can't really change one little piece here, one little piece there. We're just going to step over people's toes and get the people around us upset, right? We have to kind of take this holistically and kind of offer something that is fundamentally different, and which we've been describing in the last few live streams as a kind of shell container, which protects this kind of, let's say, more wholesome, holistic behaviors and activity between
Internally.
people internally, but which to the outside looks just like the system. So nobody has a problem with it. It doesn't step on toes, right?
Right. That would be the best way to look at it. Is like the shell. The shell is built up in such a way that not only is it trying to protect the inside, but the individual ego thrown to do war at it from the bottom. This is a reference to a couple to things we've been describing already. But in reference to that diagram, the ego flame diagram, where the ego stack is basically throwing its bottom agencies to disintegrate with the others, so as to uproot the whatever stack it feels like it's at war with.
Right.
What we're trying to say in that context is that we're in that war interaction at the bottom. We're offering a small ingredient, which we like to call a seed, or our mimetic pill, if you will, that is included in that interaction, that dissipates the energy that would have been put into the war effort, and reconstruct. Shit, this is getting a little bit. This is getting a little bit out there.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up
it's
the
hard
diagrams
to.
bit.
It's kind of hard to keep
So
it.
what you're getting
concrete.
at, right? What you're getting at here is that we have interactions between people. We're all people, and even though our interactions may be kind of state derived and kind of like you said, trade, which is a form of war, even if it looks nice.
Social rules.
Social rules in a systemic kind of sense, in which we're pushing and pulling levers and buttons of each other.
Where things are legal or
So,
illegal.
This is just the way that society in its current form works in the majority of interactions and senses. And yet we can all gather that there are what I've called the side channel interactions, which are ambiguous. They're not state driven or run, but through the side channel,
So, like the
we can
gifting-
have something like a friendship.
A good example of something that bypasses the formal interactions of the system is the gift economy,
Right.
which
And
which the system is still trying to
Even understand.
recuperate
Yeah.
to some extent through holidays and things like that.
Right. So I was going to pull up some diagrams. We normally
If you had noticed,
would have these ready to
there's
go.
only designated time in the year where we're free to
Give a gift.
engage in giving, but because it's limited to the specific occasions, the net effect is that the system recuperates the instinct by feeding the narrative of, like, spend your money on these gifts. This is the time to do it, and so.
Right.
And so it moves you away from the idea of giving something for the reason of giving to
A specific time to do it. Time
to
and
a
place.
schedule
Right.
of when this is appropriate. And if you are a kind of person that lands himself into giving freely outside of these of the specified schedule, like opinions now become
Right.
formed about you with regards
And then
to,
suddenly you're weird.
yeah, you become like a weirdo because you're not following calendar,
Right.
a mechanical schedule into which this is supposed to occur. So even the occasion is controlled for.
Right.
So the gift economy is perhaps the most suppressed element by the system in general,
Mm-hmm.
which silos the ego against ego.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
With
Okay.
that, I need to take a break.
Yeah, so, all right, we'll take a short break here.
It's a piss.
A short piss.
Peace.
I just want to kind of keep coming back to this idea, I guess, how to not be stupid. And why does this matter to people? A lot of, let's say, I don't know, we're all thinking people really, but a lot of people who have, let's say, become aware of the kind of state of civilization of the world and where it's all going, they anybody who has that kind of awareness bubbling up in them seems to will probably think that there's a problem of stupidity happening of some sort, which they
So-
can't quite pin it down on what it is or what to do about it, and how to and moreover how to organize
So,
together with
I-
others who have that same view to do something about it.
So I can paint
Right?
the picture of urgency, if you will, easily. Going back to the diagram.
And
let's just use the diagram.
we need some like divine help here, because we don't even get views live on our live stream, right, and that kind of stuff. And but we're we're taught, like, I mean, we get
It's
you
fine.
know,
It's out there.
for a good one, 50 to 100. It's out there. And again, this is a casual dev meeting. We don't expect anything from it, but
So-
we need to be able to reach out somehow. Somehow
So
we need
we've spent
to,
so much time on terminology, and oftentimes people are wondering what the fuck for. So here, I will explain one reason why we do this kind of language magic, if you will, whatever. Mental gymnastics is another term for it. take it if you take it or
It's
leave
kind of
it.
a derogatory term.
It is generally, but it's not something that human beings can escape from doing. Anyway, long story short, why would this be urgent? Because if you look at the bottom of this particular diagram, what you can't actually predict is which ego you are at any given time. You appear in this schema in every box, depending on the moment, depending on the circumstance,
Right.
depending on the situation.
And there's a vertical sort of axis here, which is we're talking about power, kind of, right?
Right. And should you, the agency that you've taken onto yourself, happen to be at the bottom of whatever stacking situation is currently happening, guess what? You are at war. It's not of your choosing. It's in.
Right.
If you want the more blunt picture, the real war is when soldiers like for hire get sent off by superiors to fight somebody else off because the superiors had a conflict.
Right.
Right. So this is the easiest thing to imagine here.
And also, like homelessness, you're at war with the environment because you're at the very bottom.
Everybody else in your environment, yes. Like every single person
Right.
that comes across you is either
Right.
shooting change at you, changing nothing, or, like wants you out.
Of their turf
Mm-hmm.
or whatever.
So the
Right.
urgency is not in this moment, that moment, or whatever. It's in the fact that at any given moment, you can be the very bottom, sent to war on behalf of whatever is pressuring you into doing that. And it could be a personal war. It could be an abstract, legit, actual war. Whatever. It
Right.
doesn't matter what the grade scale is. It's,
The point is that the universe is fighting itself at some points
so
due to this egoic fracturing of
we
consciousness.
we like to excuse this as the myth of competition. In fact,
Right,
the
that it's
system,
good. It's good, actually.
In fact, the system has a direct myth to allow it to happen.
Right.
In saying that this is the course of reality. And this is where this is actually where I want to point out to the soundbite myth versus the feedback observation method. Is that this reality is fed to you through soundbite only. The war can only be achieved if the faith is not supplanted by the feedback observation method, but rather faith transformed to truths on the foundation of another soundbite. That is the only reason for there to be a conflict, a war
Mm-hmm.
between the egos at the
Right.
bottom.
Otherwise, we would
is in-
cooperate and build together with anybody we encounter.
if the sound bite, even if the sound
Potentially.
bites are bullets, right? Like we're not talking about sound bites as words necessarily, but their dissipation
Mhm.
into
Yeah.
and their reification
Right.
into whatever medium.
Medium.
So bullets
Mhm.
are one such medium.
It's a communication. It's an object being communicated over a medium.
Exactly.
Sure.
So this is the sense of urgency in that no matter which way you go, so long as this ego stacks conceptualization is reified over and over and over again, you will wind up being one of the egos at the bottom eventually, just through sheer circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Pull the
Yeah.
wrong lever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
From being labeled a criminal to being canceled to being pegged into a category,
Right.
all of which are less and less concrete things. So you could either be outright canceled, or you could be that weirdo, or you could be that, like whatever stratifies, whatever. You could be black, you could be female, you could be
cancel culture doesn't exist.
Right. That's the only thing that exists to civilization. It's the only thing I would argue is that if you think it's new, then you haven't seen its acceleration throughout. It's an example of an exponential feature in which didn't seem to actually resonate much up until recently because technology has accelerated its ability to stick. So it went from lynch mobs
So
to global cancellations.
this, which is another form of war.
They're all war.
This so
The destruction of agency is what war is.
since we brought this up here, this stack, the war stack, I wanted to kind of bring this discussion quickly to metastability and what war does to that in the context of entropy, in which things dissolve and decay and basically go down into shit, right?
Okay.
Like that's what we're looking at, and I wanted to juxtapose that with the guild potential. Instead of war, if you have the guild, what you are doing potentially
What's happening in that bottom place
is taking advantage of this being and all that we are. There is actually there are different ways to go. You can go down into war and destruction, but also you can kind of snap to the human body, the human mind,
So-
the neural operating system, all of our potentiality,
So-
our herd nature, really, to love each other and all that. That's another way we can jump.
Okay.
We don't have to jump down the hill.
And there's a technical switch that this diagram brings up, and I've been referring to it as when you have that war relationship, or in particular the trade relationship, which is a representative of it. The seed, the mimetic thing that we're also trying to inject
Right,
here,
right.
that makes anything particularly different in this diagram, but still uses this diagram to move off of it as its reality, like the awareness
I
of
get
this
it.
being the reality, if you will.
I get it. This is the side channel we're bringing up here.
Yeah.
So
If-
any trade, any war, trade is war.
So we have an
are
opportunity-
using this as an opportunity,
Yeah.
a context
To
to
exchange- to give an
side
artifact.
channel,
To give an artifact that's besides
an artifact which
that's
is a
beside
seed,
this stack.
an unexpected artifact.
The
which
first
plants a
element
seed.
the first element of this artifact that is noteworthy, if you will, that it contains the expression of the situation. That is what is it brings to the foreground of awareness, and in fact, again, foreground and background are becoming a part of this. Is what, first of all, that's how we model the memeplex, a layer and a
Right.
layer in the model. But secondary, now we're going to use that as a tool, a utility to explain the situation. In that, in this is the background, or rather, So this ego stack, if you will, is the foreground that is layered on top of the background of the ontological matrix, which is composed of sound bites, right? And in which faith and truth are
Right.
are obfuscated from one another, in that a sound bite supplants faiths in such a manner that it commodifies them, in that if you
so-
have faith in this, then this is your product. If you have faith in that, then this. If you don't have faith in God, you're an atheist. There's the atheist package. If you're
Right.
a believer in God, there's the theistic package.
Right. The soundbite interpretation.
Right. So none of it
we're kind of
lends itself.
skipping ahead a little bit.
Didn't-
So just by
I'm trying to
by
give a picture of the background.
I know, but foreground we already brought up. So, as this ego structure as foreground, what that means is that
So, yeah.
this is the ongoing current reality, like the needle on the vinyl, right?
Right.
That
So-
this is the mechanism that's causing change in a background context. That's
Right.
what we mean in
That's
this is
what I was trying to get to, actually, in my little spiel here. In
Right,
that,
so we
in
need to
that
change the foreground
So
structure.
this is the foreground, and the background for which we were just describing, has another diagram. This is the ontological matrix itself.
Which we'll bring up.
So if we have the, if we are going to, we're bringing up the picture now. We have a bubble in there. That is. There
We'll
we go.
find it. Is it the latest one?
That is the latest one. So
Okay.
right in the right down in the middle of it, and I think what I'll change in this diagram is I'll increase the size of the circle.
Yeah, it's so small.
Yeah, it looks like it looks not as more significant as any other, but right in the middle of
Can't
it.
even zoom in on it.
Yeah, right in the middle of it, we have the matrix, which is the ontological matrix that we're describing.
Right. So we.
This is the background.
This was our original chart that we'd
Yeah.
had.
And then we expanded it a bit more to see how membership actually affects all of this.
Right. Because in the matrix in the middle here, this is kind of like our shared media. So.
How I'm going to speak to Brian, for example.
Right.
Given
and,
all of our given languages
And
meaning behind the
given
words.
the space and time, an agent can be interacting with a member, right? So, and that's where we have this whole other side here, labeled Portal Mountain. This is where we have.
as its mythology, making machine.
So we have members instead of agents, right? But they're all interacting in the same vortex of shared media.
Right, which is why this is in the middle,
Right.
and this is our backdrop.
And so,
So
we
this-
created this one first, which I think is interesting because we're discussing right now the war and the trade.
Right.
The trade and the war that happens between people. But we can inject through this side, members can inject into that trade the side channel information, which
So-
plants a seed, which is like, hey, there's more to life than this.
Okay, sure. And so before we get to that point, let's go back to the original. The original version of this diagram. No.
Oh, you mean that?
Yeah.
There. Okay.
So if we were to just focus on this side of it, then and create the background in the matrix, if you will, of like this is all the things that are happening. This is like the ontology, with agencies happening and whatnot.
Yep.
The second image, the second diagram, the ego constitutes the individual agency specs that you would find
Right.
appearing within the matrix itself.
So this has background.
So this is
All these sound bites.
This is the background built out of everything on the top.
Okay, we have ego up here. And
We have ego. We have ego as a singular entity divided up into multiple agencies, filling out the matrix ontology. All the agents behave according to whatever mythology is working within the matrix. So this means that, therefore, agent X has to do this with agent Y, X, and Y, Z, and ABC. This, then that. If this, then that. If this, then that. If this, then
Right.
that. So it's programming.
Yeah, yep.
So social.
Welcome, Dills.
This
Pull up a beer.
so this is the whole thing is social programming, right? And the characteristic of this side of the diagram is it's entirely mechanistic. It's a machine.
Right.
It works as an algorithm instead of as a living, as anything that's alive. It's just a program.
Can we delineate better foreground and background here?
Well, it's more on the mimetic.
So
layers.
matrix itself as background, which
It
is
serves as the mimetic background at that point. So all the systems of beliefs that one might find themselves in that moment. So if they have a new piece of information, those beliefs are going to say that means that.
but kind of a collective beliefs though too,
Right.
Because the matrix implies a medium,
Well, this is This is where multiple agencies are involved.
right?
But they're very much self-similar because they're all ego. Right? They're only operating in what's my reward,
Right.
what's my punishment, what's my reward, what's my punishment.
Yeah.
And
Hijacked affect,
So
as they call it.
yeah, so they don't operate individually per se. The individuality appears in the agency simply because everybody's in different circumstances. But they operate under the same principles. What do I gain? What do I lose? Market.
Yeah.
They're just market things.
Right.
So that's the whole economy myth. in the system. So yeah, so if that's the backdrop of that's how like almost everybody operates in different instances, only differing by circumstance, right? What does that individual bubble look like? Well, that's that ego flame stack in which an ego is divided up into multiple egos and fighting with itself.
Right.
So either it's a group of people or even an individual fighting within their own mind.
Right.
So if you will take the two diagrams together, the ontological matrix is like a bunch of these bubbles connected together into like this. What would you call it? Like again, appear and disappear in quantum
Right.
sort of playing field,
Mhm.
where an agency would appear, disappear, depending on the circumstances. So, like,
Right.
you're going to be a different person for your spouse versus your parents versus your children versus your
Right. And
peers.
very often it's that quote different person is still something functioning within the obfuscated meta narrative, a transactional relationship between people.
Well, the
Which
transactional
is like,
part,
you give me this, I'll give you that. I feel good.
here's where
whatever.
it's very mechanistic, in that you're only recognized as being the father of children, being the husband of so, being the working employee of so and such and such. It's always in relationship to yet one more thing, right? So it doesn't really like establish anything except the other things. And when you try to look at those other things, they're going to be established by yet other things, and so on and so forth. And so none of that actually manifests as anything tangible or real, but it's real on paper, right? And so it has a consequential force, if you will,
Right.
in that because things were said a certain way, they're going to this will happen certain.
Right. So soundbite reification, basically.
Yeah.
Rules.
And the more you look at this picture, it's like an entire like intangible mass of
Right.
things that don't amount to anything,
And
which
so-
in the objective side
Of course, and
looks like nihilism.
And this creates a whole machine, and here we are, the breakaway civilization, just running itself into the ground.
And so bringing it back to the spectrum of stupidity on the objectivistic side, because there is no meaning to be gained from this clusterfuck. You get
Right.
there is no meaning.
Right.
On a solipsistic side, you invent a reason for it without actually, again, focusing back on the feedback or any of the what is actually being observed.
And what
or-
would that look like? The
And so those are sound
solipsistic
bites.
side.
It would look like theism, like your typical evangelical Christian,
Okay,
or
okay.
Orthodox
Yeah, yeah.
Judaism,
So-
or just like any of the superstition that you see people like just like giving up
So-
on all reality in general and just being like, this is how it is. That's it.
Right.
Just like some idea.
Right.
And in both cases, they're based on ideas. They're not based on anything tangible. They're based on
So
the idea is this or the idea is that.
in the objectivist frame, it seems like there's a lot more potential for like nihilistic feeling
Yes.
of meaninglessness. And-
Objectivism and nihilism are like one leads to the other consequentially.
And the other,
Eternalism.
on the subjective side, it seems like there's maybe a trap of becoming so engulfed in your own sniffing of your own farts,
Right.
that you don't,
So you get into
you're not
what's called-
listening to anything else.
So you,
right?
you get what's
have
called
your
a-
belief, and that's it.
So you get what's called eternalism in that sense, like instead of the nihilism that nothing is meaningless, you latch on to a ridiculous meaning, right, and perpetuate that as if
Right.
it was eternal, but it's still sitting there like an idea, and everybody, whoever comes across it, has their own take on what the fuck that idea
Right.
even is.
And this is this is maybe I'm thinking damaging in some ways because
They're
you
both.
don't pay attention to the world around you.
Well,
in the subjective.
In either sense, you get the zeitgeist, the neglect, because in both cases, in one case there's no point, and in the other there is a point, but we don't know what the fuck it is.
Here's where I'm trying to go with that.
But those are both non-useful answers. What if
Right.
there is a point, then you should know what it is, and if there isn't a point, why is that the case?
So when you have a lack of meaning, you are ripe for being kind of exploited and having a meaning injected from, say, mass media or whatever, like to say this is the cause.
Right.
You know, fear this and we'll fix it by doing this. But on the subjectivist side, they may have somebody who's towards that may think that they've got it all figured out and they don't need even the mass media injection of meaning, right?
Okay.
'Cause
we could probably actually describe this more like left and right in politics. On the one side, you have an obtuse, don't tell me nothing, sort of personality that emerges, right?
Okay.
This is the order of things. That is the way. On the other side, you have like
Mm-hmm.
we
The
we can never know what the real way is.
Mhm.
Therefore, we have to open our mind to the point that our brain falls the fuck out.
Yeah.
So
And fuck history and learning lessons. And all
one
that.
is running into a fucking wall, like full speed. The other one cannot pick a direction to go into. They're both doing fucking nothing. So, on the objectivistic side, you're running straight into the wall. And yes, it is connected with the right wing and whatever.
Mm.
And then on the solipsistic side, you're torn into so many directions that you can't. You're frozen in place. You can't do anything. Because what if? Because what if? Because what if? Because what if? 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 Well,
Right.
you know, like there are certain things that are non-negotiable. Like to survive as a human, you need oxygen, for example. That's not a vote, right?
Mhm.
You don't need opinions
Yes.
on that front.
Mhm.
So there is something to be said on both sides, but both sides collectively fall into the same problem of not being able to move anywhere.
So you would relate or attribute like objectivism and solipsism to, let's say, conservative and liberal or right and
This
left.
is where
respectively.
you kind of find examples of that. Yeah. You can't peg every single person that finds himself in the liberal side of opinions,
Of course.
if you will, on being entirely solipsistic, right? That could have objective perspectives that feed that. The
Right.
deal is not that lack of recognition that there is a spectrum that one is using to begin with, and without using that as an informative piece of feedback to make a more elaborate decision on top of just being a program in a pre-made articulation,
Mhm.
right? It's when the feedback comes back into play where you can stop looking at it as a mere spectrum of stupidity. Not that you can dislodge yourself from it. It's more in like, how do you work through it at the end of the day? To know that the feedback that you are producing out of that is not necessarily just been supplied to you.
Soundbite.
It's not been supplied to you externally, but it's something that you are
Right.
actually able to integrate
Right,
and
right.
use. And it's not
So,
just fluff. That's
A big problem I think civilization or whatever society is dealing with right now is mass media injection of soundbite, and I kind of wanted to bring that up a little bit, just because I think this, as far as how to not be stupid, and like, you know, when people kind of
well,
wake up to this.
So
And
what was the myth I mentioned? The economic myth. The problem, part of that problem is that as soon as you're starting to face the problem in any capacity, you already have ready-made sound bites to neglect your observations, to neglect
Sure.
your own
Right.
interpretation,
Right. Okay.
and to supplant that
Now
with another.
let's keep introducing this a bit more, because so I posted a link in the lobby, and thought, you know, hey, this is cool.
Sorry to do this. I gotta take a leak.
Wait for 1 sec.
Damn it.
So the
It's a live stream.
So when the only reason, like, so people are yearning for a meaning, essentially. That's what kind of like the crux of this is that
So
people.
the nihilistic, on the nihilistic side, you almost have a decision being made that says there is no meaning,
Right.
and that's the meaning.
But that, okay, so we have no meaning making, which is what I would associate with the feedback observation
Right.
technique.
So-
Ability to make meaning ourselves, not to just be supplied it, but to literally create meaning.
Right.
Right. So you need that. So first off, this guy would say, some professor, you have to have this condition where you're isolated. You're not having community connection. So second is that you're not, and it's related, is that you're not able to make meaning of your world around you. That we collectively make meaning, right? So one, and then two.
So those are systemic myths right
The
there.
third,
Those are things that are literally are believed as our society is progressing.
Is that it's just to be normal.
Yeah,
That's
this is
normal
the normal
situation. Okay,
yeah.
right. But it's actually a void that gets filled with these mass meaning.
Right. With
the,
arbitrary
The
meaning.
third is an anxiety which arises from this, which is ambiguous and unknown as to its cause. Right.
Right, which only is exacerbated as you age, simply because
Exacerbated.
you're made bigger. Because
Yeah.
no matter which way you venture out to make meaning, what you get back, right, is more arbitrary drivel. Right.
Right,
And
so
so everything you built up is arbitrary.
There is
Everything
one
you
more
built up.
condition, I forget it, but the kind of point I want to bring up is that there's these conditions that we can look around us and see all of us seem to have this, that we're all kind of anxious. We all don't know how to make meaning. We all don't have community connection.
Well, that's the whole point of pointing out the word zeitgeist. Is that recognition that you're not
The zeitgeist is
alone.
an anxious kind of feeling,
So
for sure.
so
the
the idea,
soul
the,
itself
the
is an
idea
anxious
of,
feeling.
So we're redefining.
In our definition.
We've redefined the word soul. Soul is just a feeling that builds up as a consequence of neglecting yourself.
Your responsibility, basically.
So not knowing what you're doing for, over time becomes a quality of like meaning, of a feeling of meaninglessness. We take that to mean the word soul, and the recognition that other people have that quality about them as they're moving through life is what we call the zeitgeist, the known but unspoken feeling that people
That there's
recognize,
something missing.
that they recognize but cannot quite pinpoint what that would be. So we're not talking about like an actual item thing called soul that exists
A soul
in
object
general.
that somehow is here floating around-ish
Yeah,
somewhere.
it's an idea of because there's a buildup of self-neglect that goes through your entire life. That there's this angst, there's
Right.
this negative quality.
So the soul is like a motivating feature, kind of against civilization,
A lot of
as the breakaway civilization,
Yeah.
because it's breakaway really from ourselves.
So to connect it back to like say something more concrete, this is what people piggyback on and try to sell you a religion on because they know that feeling
That
exists,
anxiety's there.
and they try to give you like that solipsistic meaning of like you don't have to worry about any of the feedback, any of your observation.
Just
this is
follow
your
this.
this is your sound
This
bite.
is the truth.
This is your
Follow
sound
the
bite.
truth, obey, and
And that's how it's hijacked.
you'll have rewards in heaven.
Yeah, right. Like, so the feeling is real, but the way people are describing it, they're selling you a product instead, and that's what's not real. So
Right.
the souled idea of the soul is not the soul we're discussing. That's the long and short of the story.
Yeah.
I saw the eye roll in there, so I just wanted to clarify. I wanted to clarify that we're not using words in their usual way, because what I find personally is that most
the
of
people
those
watching on the camera are rolling their eyes. The
Yeah.
soul. What are you talking about? Soul.
no, the reason we use these kinds of words is because most of the time they're useless. Like, when people talk about their soul, they don't mean anything by it. It's like some weird abstract thing that they're talking about. What we're trying to do is to say, okay, sure, we can have that conversation, but let's make it more meaningful. You know, like, let's talk about something that's actually
Yeah, that's,
real, that's happening, that we can all relate to. Again,
We
comes back to talking to different kinds of people.
We
to-
appropriate so many words because
appropriation is what we call
they're
it.
basically meaningless how people use them. So, we thought, hey, why not upgrade English?
Yeah.
Why not?
And other languages too. Why not?
And with that, we will
Be
take
right back.
a quick break. Okay, in your mind, you've thought of
Oh
a
no, I'm going to bring it back
tangent?
home. I'm going
Okay,
to bring it back home.
Bring it all the way back home.
All
buddy.
right, so what I've just spent some time explaining to somebody that was also present in the physical sense.
You mean
I
just
went-
before break?
Just before break, I went into an entire spiel about the nature of the soul and the zeitgeist and all of that.
we did record it.
But it didn't
How you
seem like
doing,
it have
Mariah?
it didn't seem like it had a point besides just a background explanation, but it actually does have a point to our meeting, in that the ontological matrix that we're discussing is already primed with the zeitgeist.
Yes,
And
yes, yeah.
includes the soul.
Right,
And
right.
this is the interface through which the artifact
Right.
is relayed. That's the relevance. So, the seed
Right.
that we're going to be discussing, the mimetic medicine, the artifact
This
that
is
we're
why-
implanting,
this is
is
why-
communicating on that interface.
This is why people love it.
Exactly, and why the ontological matrix would actually be able to be susceptible to it without
Right.
necessarily crushing the
And
whole thing.
this is
It's
related-
part of it. It's already been modeled.
This is related to the discussion of metastability and the, let's say, two ways that it can go.
See, I told you it's
war downwards and
Right. Or
guild
within war, the
Upwards.
within the actual transactional nature of war, right? The
Right, we have to
artifact
interface.
could be actually is supplanted, and it would
War is
speak to
the-
a
the
different
default.
element, to the soul, to the zeitgeist of the other ego stack, and therefore the
right.
this is the negotiation
So
point.
there is
So-
a hope, even in war, that the
In fact, the hope is in war.
that the people behind the egos that you're warring with can understand this side channel communication, which is something greater. That there's more meaning to life than this war.
Right, and so this is now our feedback that we're observing as we're just realizing this as this conversation is progressing, that in the actual seeding, the actual element that can progress from the one phase of the ontological matrix to the other is actually in the mechanism of its worst quality.
Wait, what? I completely gapped on that.
So the worst quality of the system
Yeah.
is war,
Right.
but the transaction to exchange the artifact is found
Of war.
within the mechanism of war
Okay,
inside
got
the
it.
trade guild.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the it's at the bottom. It's the very bottom of the
Right.
the lost, if you will, the ego that has been dropped down from the stack to go grind against another stack to death. It is in that circumstance where the artifact can actually,
And where
this speaks
the zeitgeist
to,
is most apparent.
and this speaks to why the religious experience happens in the most traumatic events,
At the worst bottom. The fucking bottom.
which in the general course of the system are recuperated with another soundbite belief versus feedback observation method tracking, which we keep referring back to as being the more appropriate quote-unquote solution, so that the gap between faith and truth is not short-stop. It's
I'm
not
reminded of
short-circuited.
the Christmas Miracle. I think it was like World War One, like 1917 or 18 or 17, whatever. Anyways, along the trenches, it was Christmas Day, and like the people literally who were the day before shooting at each other suddenly like came.
Oh,
they just stuck their heads up and were like,
Yes,
hey, hey,
yes, yes.
and they fucking had a soccer match.
Yes,
in the-
this is German and English.
in the
World War One.
the DMZ or
It's a
whatever,
very
like,
famous-
between the two.
They had
And
no animosity towards each other.
imagine how,
They were
like,
talking about
how-
families.
This
And what
is
their
like
plans are to
this
go
is
when they
like
go
world
home.
history, historical proof of exactly what we're talking about. they celebrated Christmas with a happy soccer game, and
So you're speaking to the case where ego versus ego was at war, and a situation manifested where the artifact, d- regardless of being recognized or not at the time, that for one
Right.
moment that
Right.
artifact had played this role of uniting the very people who are supposed to be grinding to death.
right, and
And this is the case for the artifact. In fact, this is what
right, it's just waiting to
it's
explode.
this moment that
in a way.
it's this moment that we are, if you will, attached to seeing happening in various contexts. If I was to qualify my intent in having these discussions, is to produce such moments over and over and over until they are
Right.
recognized for what they are,
and they until the point where they're gaining a foothold.
and supply language to describe why they are happening, and what where
Right, right.
the circumstance arises
So
from.
we've got all these people, all these organizations, all these groups who are just chomping at the bit, waiting to figure out what is this magic thing that's going to agitate the whole structure, the whole network, into these higher coherent stabilities.
Hmm.
Like, how does it?
And so
What does it look like?
And so the observed feedback that we could continue to hammer on is really that we must look back to nature in the way it organizes itself, and what we notice from that feedback when we look at it is that it has an internal coherent code that it itself overlays on top of its activities. And the point we're constantly
Right.
trying to make is that so long as it's arbitrary, we will not reach a stage, if you will, that continues this pattern.
Which
um,
pattern?
Of nature building itself up from the inside out.
Right.
Um,
With that arbitrary structure.
and the only reason I'm hammering on that point as being non-arbitrary is because that is the framework that's already given to us.
Right.
So
And-
that's
and the-
that's the reason for the non-arbitrariness of it.
Right, right. The non-arbitrariness of the tree of life, if you will, to give a metaphor. But the stack of complexity, the complex adaptive systems that have built up, of the potential of which we are right here fucking now, having all this
The
mind.
very example
We've-
of it.
We,
yes.
we see each
To be-
other as brothers, and we know that others see people that way too.
To be able to be so calculative so as to break away the mental representation of it so far so as to we can be nihilistic and eternalistic and completely besides the point,
Right.
that is an insane amount of power given to us. And it's kind of
Yes,
it's
we
kind
do
of
it.
it's really ironic that the power is given to the objectivist or solipsistic reintegration of the system, which rests upon a given predetermined, for us at least, background. To choose to
Squizzy?
so the choice to ignore this background and to favor the spectrum of objectivism and solipsism is in fact stupid
Right.
from that perspective.
And we're saying that this is what causes and enables the breakaway civilization to continue to be broken away from the body, from the individual, and to serve masters
Its negligence
which are not
is
nature.
Its negligence is self-perpetuating into more negligence, and then the
Right.
and any response to that negligence is perceived as something to be neglected.
Wait, I didn't get.
The
You're probably were talking about the recuperation.
The breakaway civilization responds to the qualities that arise from negligence, the soul, the zeitgeist, as something
Right.
to be
Band-aided.
banded over, recuperated into sound bites, and perpetuated further without resolution,
Right.
because those elements allow a further interface into the punishment and reward mechanism
Mm-hmm.
or interface. And the point I'm trying to make there is that it's another exponential buildup in which a little bit of neglect causes a little bit more of neglect, causes a little bit more neglect, causes a little bit more,
Right.
and
The
each time
Band-Aid ball.
slightly more.
It's a ball of Band-Aids at this
Right.
point. You can't even tell what's underneath.
And then you have a full-blown ideology that covers every base to simply keep the neglect going.
For its own sake.
And such an ideology is what's been referred to the myth of the system.
Right.
So the meritocracy, economy, psychology, peace,
Mm-hmm.
all of these different little myths are ways to perpetuate. Peace perpetuates war, for example. It's a way to neglect the circumstances that arise.
Right. Peacemaking.
To cause
peacekeeping, let's say.
Yeah, to cause egos to go grind against themselves.
Right.
To neglect the actual causality of it, and
Right.
to go.
To say
and
you're not allowed to do this fighting thing anymore, but still the
But by-
conditions that cause you to fight
by
are still
do-
there.
But they're doing this by throwing bodies at the problem. You're not allowed to
Right.
cause war, so we
We'll war against war.
destroy.
We'll kill anybody who's gonna war.
Exactly. So it becomes a self-fulfilling
The
prophecy that peace is war. So,
Right. And and peacekeeping without deep understanding of conflict is
Well-
peacemaking, is war.
peacemaking is the notion that so imagine you're a third ego stack, looking at two different ego stacks warring at each other, and your solution to that is to look at them as one single ego stack against which you throw your bottom egos to grind
Right.
against,
Sure, yeah.
destroying it from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Band-Aids, again.
all in all, the concept of peace in this case had done nothing but create war.
Man, oh man, oh man.
Anytime you go to destroy an ideology, anytime you try to destroy a way of thinking, anytime you try to destroy a child from, and I'm guilty of this, I have my own kids to raise in this society such that they are not shunned by the society, which means I war with my children.
Yeah.
Tell me we are not on the spectrum of stupidity, where I am
Right.
forced to engage in stupid activities against my own children, just
Right.
so that they are acceptable individuals for the rest of the mechanism.
Just so that they don't have to war with
For the rest of
outside
the
society.
mechanism.
Yeah. You do the war with them because you're more compassionate. Otherwise, they're going to be, well, fucked.
And,
Yeah,
and,
man.
and on
Oh,
top of
man.
that, recognizing the fact that I'm doing it, and yet not having the choice to not do it.
Mhm. Right.
It's fucked.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Like, we're kind of in a big picture kind of stream today, dev meeting.
All right, so
I'm feeling fired up about it. Like,
well,
because so many people are on we're on the same page as so many people, but
Right.
nobody has created the system, quote unquote, which can unstabilize this metastability of the system as it is in a good way. we can all war and cause and unstabilize it downwards.
Well-
but how do we project something that plants a seed and plants a seed and plants a seed?
Okay.
And by
Sorry.
natural means causes a like
So the seed thing is like why I'm
like a crystallization of
over-talking
water which is
with
already
you.
below freezing but hasn't frozen. You
Right.
touch it and it expands.
Okay, so let's
How do
use
we
that.
do that?
Let's
How do
use
we
that
do
imagery.
that?
First of all, let's explain the imagery, and then let's move on. There's metastable phase shifts is kind of what I think this is what we called.
Yeah. It's a phase transition.
There's two situations that you can do an experiment with water, distilled water specifically. One of them is you get it to below freezing, but you don't agitate it, and so the water will remain a liquid at a
Right.
below freezing temperature, and then you kind of flick the bottle or something like that, or open it, or whatever the fuck you do.
Agitate.
You agitate it, and all of a sudden the whole thing crystallizes into an ice cube, just like in one go. And it's quite fascinating to watch.
Imagine if you just plunge your hand in, and then now you have a fist of like ice cube, and then
you could do that.
you get freezer burn or whatever.
No,
like
you can
some
you can
gangrene shit going on.
You can literally do that, and it won't be that damaging.
How would you? Well, you could smash it. You could smash it. I'm just playing. But yeah, that's
all
what
all
we're
you
talking
do is
about.
this, and it falls apart because your hand doesn't freeze that fast.
Well,
Anyway, your hand is already.
what if your hand was like this shape, and then you couldn't remove it from the ice cube?
The second situation is that you can get water to over distilled water again, over 100 degrees without it
Past
evaporating,
boiling.
and then you just flick it a little bit, and it agitates it enough, and the whole thing evaporates. So
Right.
a whole shift in. A phase shift happens in like one go, and this is kind of how we're talking about the ontological matrix and this quote unquote artifact that we were talking about that is injectable in war.
Right, the mimetic medicine artifact.
The specific
Right. And we brought this
the
up
specific
before.
interface that we're trying to discuss, where the zeitgeist and consequentially the soul offers an interface into it for that artifact, artificial
Right.
projection.
It wants to be received.
So the next phase, I guess, of the conversation will then be once that is sprinkled into the ontological matrix, whatever scale that might be in, what happens? What's the how does this unfold into greater and greater coherence? How does this whole structure of the ontological matrix become the underlying overmind, or this is a new term, I'll explain it later, the underlying Grandmaster's thought process, if you will, if there was
Squeezy.
such a thing as an overlaying mind,
Right.
hence the overmind idea. What does that look like? What specifically happens in the ontological matrix to facilitate a restructuring? So, first of all, the restructuring itself. This is the subject of guild dynamics. So, what the structure looks like. Guild dynamics describes the different structure internally, operationally. So this is where you get your fundamental guilds, this is where you get your mediation guilds, this is where you get your networking guilds, and everything that unfolds from that point on.
Right.
That's what that looks like within the overlaying structure. And secondary to that, how does that grow? And that mechanism is described by the domains of progress. And so the domains of progress is the thing that takes the small little bit and makes it slightly larger, takes that slightly larger little bit as the small thing and makes it slightly larger, and so on and so forth, exponentially changing the structure from one tiny seed to the whole outwards. So those two ideas, the idea of having a mechanism to tie into the war backdrop of the current ontological matrix
Right.
processing.
Injection of the mimetic medicine.
So the initial, if you will, seed versus the growth of that seed into an unfolding system of guilds. So what does that look like? And this
Right.
I'm hoping to try to cover today.
Right. Yeah, that would be awesome. So we're describing that state change as if you flick the water and it turns to ice. This initial flick is a seed, in which I'm sure is being developed all over the world. People are getting awake.
It's
and
an
all this kind of
agitation.
stuff.
It's the I didn't think of that. It's the aha moment. It's a quality. A
Right.
quality that appears in defiance of expectation, right? You were expecting to feel good, you feel bad. Why? Things like that.
Right.
That's an agitation.
Right. Yes, and that aha moment can be very difficult if you're very much enraptured in a let's say current mass narrative,
Well,
right?
that aha moment is cleverly hidden by the plethora of sound bites
Because they're-
offered by the system to
The
recuperate.
band-aids will just keep
to
coming.
recuperate, yeah.
The system, well, quote unquote.
Why the charlatan is such a big problem? This is their playing field.
Right. There to offer the band-aids.
And the charlatan is the great example of the system recuperating
Right.
everything, which is
And
why
to benefit its own
which is
ego.
why which is another element that makes this conversation more difficult is how do you separate this soundbite from the charlatan soundbite,
Right.
which can only be
Right,
done
right.
by the by the feedback observation method, incidentally offered only in this soundbite
And faith.
with its its appropriated definition. Sure.
Right. Yeah, that's a challenge. It's impossible to know.
Because the sound bites also appropriate the definitions of faith and truth and all of that stuff,
Right.
and so they tend to undermine.
What is the
feedback.
difference between a purveyor of band-aids and a purveyor of deep natural connection or solution?
That also happens to have a band-aid on hand.
Appearance.
On hand.
Right.
No, like you also use band-aids.
Right.
Like you don't you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
We have sound bites.
We
This
have
is
the
how we
sound-
communicate.
Exactly.
Yes.
So this is also how it's
So,
overlaying
How do you tell
with the system.
one brand of band-aids but from another brand of band-aids? What's the difference?
Incidentally, the name Band-Aid is a brand,
Mhm.
not the name of the actual item.
Which is called?
I don't even fucking know.
It doesn't have a name. It's called a band-aid.
That's how sad it is. But like to Google something is becoming a verb, and they're fighting tooth and nail for that, for it not to be a verb, so it can be so it can continue to be trademarked.
Kleenex.
Another explicit demonstration of stupidity is in believing how real words are by having them disqualified from being used for other things somehow. Like
What other things?
like a brand is a word that is on paper not allowed to stand in for other items that are not from particular representative. Like you can't make champagne outside of France and
Right. Mhm.
Russia.
Fine.
Nothing, even if it is exactly to a T the same fucking thing, it's got to be called sparkling wine.
Mm-hmm.
Because champagne only comes out from France or Russia legally.
Right.
What?
It's yeah.
So
I
so
see.
the word so somehow.
So where's
the
this going
word-
though? Because I know the problem
The
of
real-
meaning. This is the problem of meaning. But
this is going into showing how stupid it is to hang on to a word as a real thing.
right.
Does,
Okay. Yeah,
does
I see.
champagne represent a concept? The drink?
Right.
In each,
And to
in
hold on,
either
oh,
case.
it's, let's say you're managing a party. Oh, it must be champagne. It can't be sparkling water. Meanwhile,
Wine.
did that actually change anything? Like even subjectively? No.
Yeah, it's a complete clusterfuck of dealing with
Right. So we're into the objectivist, the literalism.
mhm. In which brands somehow have the same magical existence that the gods of old had beforehand. It's just now so mundane and so spectacular that we don't give a second thought to what we're the fact that what we're doing is basically the same fucking thing.
Right.
Like, what's the difference of giving a reality to a deity that
Right.
that controls laws you can't see,
And especially
or rules you can't see, versus
based on a
other
physical process, like
yeah, like
to elevate a physical process to some divine status.
to give it a false reification,
Right.
false idolatry, all of that jazz. With false idols is an interesting subject given our appropriation of terminology. So let's skip that for now.
Right.
So is possession.
Yeah. So this flicking of the water, the agitation to adjust the metastable state of something, and we're talking about the world itself, to go either towards war, which would be classic entropy.
Let's
to
call,
just
let's
grind
call it our hive mind. or
grind
something.
everything into bits, or to take advantage of the existing
Power.
power and capacity of the body and mind of the human being,
And
that feels by this through the soul, this zeitgeist, that something is
plateau
missing.
We've already have, and the plateau that we've got to already
Which is-
to propagate from.
which is the highest.
As far as it can go, yes, it's at a point of completely tunneling reality.
Right. So we're at the point where we need to get our shit together.
or completely disintegrate. Sure.
Right, and it's very easy to go one way or the other, and very dangerous. There's all kinds of, like, bioweapon, nuclear weapon, all kinds of, like, civilization-ending shit potential, which we don't need to get into. But yes, that's the downward entropy slope, and there is yet this potential for people to understand in their interactions with each other, this seed which is given to.
You know what I would qualify
To
the
see
poten-
something more to life than what it is.
You know what I would qualify the difference in this potential as opposed to, say, the same old? Because in the same old scenario, you have the bottom egos warring with each other, grinding the shit out of each other,
Right.
to the point of uprooting the other potential stack.
By the direction
But
of the
every
higher
ti-
egos.
The guild offers something to the effect of every time you do that, you end up being incorporated more into it. So more egos being thrown at the war at the bottom
Right.
allows the bottom pseudo ego, the thing that looks like
Right.
ego to other egos but isn't one, to throw its shit at it.
Right.
But instead of being disintegrated and crushed and destroyed by the secondary stack, it's slowly pulling the potential out and sort of like reintegrating it back into itself.
You're talking about the medicine?
Yeah, what the artifact
being
is supposed to
injected.
do in that context.
Right.
So it sits. So from the external perspective, it looks like you're just throwing your egos at it at
Like
the bottom,
the
like
Christmas
anything else.
the Christmas miracle of World War One.
Right.
It happens. Somehow
Like
there's
you're
a
throwing
sign
your
is, a
soul-
sign is given.
You're throwing your soldiers, but the outcome is all of a sudden the singing instead of the shooting.
Right.
The soccer game instead of so sure it can happen for a moment when everything disintegrates back into its own whatever, but what we're almost insisting on here, without modeling, if you will, is that use that as the hook, and then perpetually grow that into something else.
Right. And I just wanted to mention this was recuperated. The next year of the war,
Next day.
the next day, yeah, they fucking slaughtered each other. But the next year, they made fucking damn well sure that the planes were bombing the shit out of literally everything, and everybody was scared. It was not gonna fucking happen again. So
Yep.
there's your Band-Aid.
Yeah. So the interaction. Where's the diagram?
Every Christmas, we must bomb the shit out of the
Let's
fucking...
go to the ego diagram for 2 seconds.
the trenches, because they might start singing, and then they might start, doing something else, which we don't like. The war and the...
No,
Matrix.
The war.
Yep.
So
Okay, going to... Not that one, that one.
the circle. Yeah.
Here
big
we go.
circle. So what can we learn from that situation, and how does this diagram affect that? So at the bottom, what we saw is the artifact being exchanged temporarily, and people came together. However, the top of the stack could not
Reconcile that.
could not reconcile
Didn't
that.
make
They're
sense
not,
to it.
They're not part of that war.
My enemy is
and so
making friends?
and so they split upwards into reforms. They've created a reform across themselves. The revolution element is more about the same people separating from each other, so that this horizontal separation is not what I'm referring to, but in each ego stack.
Okay. Yeah. So the
imagine
reform
them
being the
disconnected.
Band-Aid of the next year that you have to bomb the shit out of the trenches.
A new set of rules.
So now a new ego has emerged, which damn well makes sure that to bomb the trenches.
Yeah, so
with
it went
during Christmas.
So an upwards reform happened, a restructuring of the rules,
Right.
a new department to oversee the
a
problem,
recuperation of the problem.
such that each individual stack will then continue to suppress the artifact and more intensely focus on the war,
Right.
so that
Suppress
the artifacts.
the artifact. I like that. We're talking about the artifact, meaning the mimetic medicine artifact.
Which
those-
arises naturally in
Right.
circumstance of war.
So this is the great artifact.
Yeah. And incidentally, it's never recognized in this picture in any layer except war.
So we're trying to manifest and uncover the artifact itself
So-
in the broader sense of a worldwide agitation, starting locally and in all localities.
what's funny?
Many places are already have the artifact.
You know what this reminds me
We're
of?
not the only ones who have the
It
artifact.
reminds me of a biblical verse, and it's the one that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye
of a needle.
of a needle than it is for the rich man.
The
or
rich
something.
man to
And-
to know heaven or know God or something like that.
Yeah, and
To
why-
enter the kingdom of heaven.
Right, and why is this reminding me of this? Is simply because if you happen to be an ego that is not at war, but is able to sit on top of one and produce a reform or a revolution to begin with, right? You're not in the position of being receptive to the artifact, because you're not at that
You didn't experience the low level
the low level grind
Right.
that will
Correct.
and so it all ties into the
So
the-
you kept receiving rewards. In other words, your affect was very pleased.
yeah, the only thing you're probably could conceive to do is to find a lower level ego to war with whatever concept it is you're not interested in dealing
Right.
with.
Or get your subordinates to deal with the to recuperate the problem, whatever it may be.
So yeah, those things tie really well together.
With that note, be right back. right? Here we
Yes.
are. Yes, we are.
All right,
Yeah.
so let's get back to the main diagram
Nice
of the
picture of somebody who posts. Paulo. Mm-hmm.
Let's get back to the ontological matrix.
The diagram.
Yeah, that's the backdrop. We've covered the foreground. We're going into the background.
Right. So
Because-
so in the warring egos, we're kind of talking about the top of this chart, all intersecting with the same matrix, in
Mhm.
which what we call the side channel, people who are aware of the guild,
The zeitgeist.
the zeitgeist, who are aware of the zeitgeist, can inject
Mhm.
and be like, hey, buddy, even though we're making a trade here, we have an impersonal interaction. This is our opportunity. I can tell you, you know what? There's something more to life than this.
Mhm. This being this artifact. So, which is often picked up by the charlatan, if you will, and recuperated back into the egoic system, and perpetuating the exact self-same replication
Damn it.
of the situation.
Right.
Typical. However, this is also the window through which this can be remedied to some extent. The quality of the remedy is in its ability to perpetuate itself forward through that matrix.
Mimetic medicine.
And so this is where the capacity of the model differentiates itself from its contemporary expositions on the problem.
And even those of antiquity.
Well, no, it reiterates some, while
Right. I mean,
completes others.
What I mean is there's hardly any contemporary expositions that would be understood.
There are none that I've come across. Essentially, the only ones that I can. This is personal experience wise, but essentially the only ones that are out there tend to rest on the shoulders of people that, for lack of a better explanation, taken far too many drugs for their own good and relayed something that is almost useful, like Freud's
But piecemeal.
Freud's
Piecemeal is the problem.
Freud's idea of ego, for example. The word
Freud.
Freud's idea of ego, for example. Great word, useless at the end. Because it's
The id, ego, super ego.
yeah, it proposed an ontological system of where there are permanent entities, which we have no concept
There you go.
of why would they would be permanent,
Mm-hmm.
interacting causally, somehow in reality, again, faith-based sound bites made into truths without any observational feedback. Right. The difference would be in the terminology from what we're offering is in that whether or not the feedback is observable at any given point. Why is the definition of ego differs in our case as being a singular abstract thingness, not really a thing,
Mm-hmm.
but rather an influencer of a great many different circumstances, but
And-
because it's a mechanism.
And what we mean by observability is that it's built into the seed, that's which planted, that your model of reality is to be tested. Even when we give it to you, it must be tested. That's what that little tiny bit there is missing
Right.
If
you have
it's to be taken on faith as truth.
If you have a soundbite that tells you do not look at feedback, of the very soundbite that says do not look at feedback, you already have a contradictory situation in your own operations.
Right.
And this is what we're trying to get to. The point is not about whatever you believe. It's just like whether or not you're getting stuck drooling looking at every blade of grass out there versus you know, accepting the fact that you are a creature moving through a grass field,
which would be the complete
to
opposite.
begin to give you that context to begin with, and derive meaning from that circumstance rather than from some abstract ideology that
Mm-hmm.
only exists when you think about it.
Yeah. So, the modern man, very commodified in its processes, in how it exists, is able to take in programming code, literally, and just run it without observing if that's even a benefit to anything. Just run it.
Well, the idea that food is a budget. What? You must make certain amounts, aka put in hours, to feed yourself.
Well, yeah, that's a
that is
very
that is a
basic
very
process.
disconnected element of living.
Right.
Not right or wrong.
And that's been
right
here for a long time. But I mean, even like the subtleties of management of people, we're no longer required. We're raised up and educated into such a system where we can be provided a spread of sound bites and simply operate as part of a mechanism, without questioning how it works or what it does. Period.
Well,
we don't care about the edge cases or the fuzziness of life and reality. We just do it. Right, and that's how society works and operates.
And this is where that spectrum actually solidifies itself, in that because these are the things you need to do and they're all meaningless, everything to do in life is meaningless.
Right.
And so the philosophy that comes out of it, the feedback that is being observed, is not necessarily one that questions the soundbite that produced it, but the consequences thereof. And you can look at that for every philosophy.
Do I feel
almost.
good or feel bad? The affect.
Yeah, look, the DNA of it, the internal structuring of approach to it. Instead of being made to line up through feedback, is being
lining up to affect,
lining up to sound bites that are extrinsic and arbitrary, that do not reflect anything meaningful, and so nihilism is consequential in everybody that operates on those principles. And
we're all subject to this system.
And with its response.
Whether you're objectivist or subjectivist, you are buying into the objectivist view, guaranteed, because you're part of society, quote unquote. You have to be.
Both. When you start to define why objectivism is the way to go, you are being solipsistic. Right? The very I define objectivism to be a certain way of things, is itself a solipsistic take on the approach. And you might be correct in a technical sense a lot of the time, which makes you very clever, but not less stupid. You can be very clever and stupid at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, we're all kind of sucked into it, no matter what.
Well, yeah, I call myself stupid for that very reason, because for the longest part of my life, a good half of it,
So-
I used my cleverness to build up my stupidity.
So the zeitgeist seems very important because this is what we can kind of tap into with each other. This kind of unspoken, unknown feeling that something is missing.
The zeitgeist would be the quality through which the trade guild, the part of the guild that faces outwards into the world, can interface with that world and
To deliver
an
the
interface
medicine.
an interface with the zeitgeist to give an artifact that actually has meaning
Via the side channel.
on the other end
Mhm.
that is not currently part of the
The
guild
ontological
itself.
matrix.
And it's an
Yeah.
offer of participation.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. So we're describing essentially evangelism in a
The offer
in
is
a
not
non-
explicit. The offer can be implicit too.
Right. It's almost never explicit unless you probably would detect that somebody is really ready for that.
Yeah,
Uh,
so it does point to a
understanding.
bit of a proselytizing element, but not
Right.
in the same sense that says wants to undercut or undermine rather the initial zeitgeist that brought the need
Right.
for it for the conversation to begin in the first place.
So fundamentally different from
Charlatan.
charlatanism. That's the one. Right. Which is a very fine line. How do you know what the difference between the charlatan's band-aid and the guild band-aid?
Well, and this is where we're getting really explicit with the model, in that the model absolutely has to have a connection between faith, the feedback observation method, and truth. And so,
Right. The faith bootstrap.
anything that tries to circumvent this path, absolutely everything that circumvents this path. Oh, just have faith.
And just have yes.
And an insertion of sound bite
So,
for that reason
if the-
instead of the feedback
if the
and the
band-aid
observation and the tracking.
if the band-aid doesn't come with, let's say, instructions saying, hey, test it out.
Mm-hmm.
You must understand what we can't proceed any further until you understand what testing it out even means.
So
This
even
is the
in,
fundamental faith bootstrap.
so even in our expression of what to have faith in, we go, okay, it's about taking a sound bite, giving it a long enough moment to watch its observation feedback moment. If you were to take that on faith to begin with, that's what faith means, then you already have the awareness that is necessary to judge the jump from faith to truth. So to take
How does truth emerge?
yeah. So how does it not emerge? If a sound bite
Gets in the way.
undercuts
Undermines.
all of that and short circuits the entire process, and in which case what you got as faith is just a sound bite, and what you get as truth is just a sound bite that moves from whatever faith
Right.
um,
And that type of apprehension always leaves open that underlying anxiety that there is truly a meaninglessness at the bottom of it, because you're not a participant essentially in the truth.
all right. So now that we've covered what dropping a seed into the ontological matrix to shift its stability,
The seed taken on faith.
what is the seed? How does it grow? And what does it grow into?
Good call.
So,
Yep.
the how does it grow is covered by the domains of progress.
Right.
The what does it grow into is covered by guild dynamics. Both subjects we've touched on before in different ways, but now we are going to draw a picture that ties those elements and also brings about the purpose of some of our mythology with regard to self and source. The mythology is used as a metaphor to view the process as a perpetual one.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, source. The source element of the description is to engage the idea of this always is this a kind of like
Right.
an eternity that
Yeah,
isn't
yeah, I
really
getcha.
eternal, but gives the
The impression of
the
it.
impression that there is a kind of eternity happening. And secondary to that is the appearance and consequent elimination of the individual self that seems to appear within a matrix of happenings. The agency, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
that relays a certain number of events as pertaining to itself. So there's that emergent self that appears, to which things are happening, and then that self will disappear,
Right.
and then it'll reappear again, and it will
Right.
continue on and so
Yeah.
forth.
So I see this dynamic. How does that relate into this idea of the metastability and planting of a seed into this, let's call it a medium of of the zeitgeist?
So the implanting of a seed is covered by the fact that the ontological matrix has the zeitgeist. It's part and parcel of it. The neglect of the soul,
Right. Right.
the neglect that appears as the soul
And-
in the collective sense of agency.
Just to interject, sorry, but long time ago we diverged from, and we caused the soul and the zeitgeist to come about with what we call the mind-body disconnect, the axial war, the breakaway civilization, in which the mind and its virtual assumptions kind of got disconnected from the body and the world around
Yeah,
it.
so it's
And that's
already
why
past that point.
we're saying pay attention to feedback. Like, so you've got a sound bite up here in your mind, in your virtual reality. How does that actually play out? Pay attention to that. And so we're trying to stitch back together that disconnect, which happened long ago, and we are so far along on this road of
By long
commodification.
ago,
Thousands and thousands
we're
of years
referring
ago.
to the first instances of using a writing system to keep track of accounting.
And even before that, this was a tendency of the mind to get swept away in its own kind of delusions, in which through oral tradition would be very well kept and
Sure.
managed, right? So this was a tendency that's
taking
ancient. It's an ancient tendency that the mind doesn't match with reality.
Right, running on autopilot, taking your
Yes.
traditions
And it's
as,
normal.
as the
You're saving energy.
gospel truth.
You don't have to worry, think and overthink things. It worked in the past. It keeps working.
Mhm.
People have always done this. It's
which
ancient.
is why mythology
This is
stabilize.
Ancient.
This is a comment on why mythology is stabilized. Like the extrinsic narrative actually gets repeated rather than modified a lot. In the same
Right.
in the same way that DNA often is only ever changed ever so slightly each generation, right?
Right.
You don't want to move off of the trunk too much.
Yeah, DNA is probably not as, let's say, bad as an example of writing and externalized memory, where you have something that can actually stand the test of time and be
Well,
literally
let's-
the same words for thousands of years.
Let's
of that
let's
set of
imagine
words.
let's imagine a mythology, but in the context of a tribe that is not engaged in a lot of rapid change, right? Like
Yeah.
year in, year out, you're doing the same things, right?
Right, makes sense.
And generation after
have
generation,
changed a
those
lot.
same things actually worked. So
Right.
so each
And this
generation
is
knows.
the conservatism, the traditionalism.
Right, and
It
so
makes sense
and so the
in that
myths that get passed along have this kind of like stable encoding of this is how you do the things,
Right.
so that as a social structure, you don't need to deviate too much from a particular mechanism that had already proven itself to work.
Right.
So initial concept of meaning is
So-
derived from that.
And
But
with-
then we change that with mathematics.
before we change that, so with these systems where myth tightly coupled and made very good sense to life and an entire life, there's not a lot of change, whatever.
Like-
This is a situation in which you'll be born up and raised into something where you will come up through the guild dynamics, through the domains of progress, very quickly,
without explicitly,
without even thinking about it, because it all matches. Everything syncs together.
Mhm.
What has happened with the breakaway civilization is that civilization has been taken as an objective for its own sake and has just gone off. And so if we try introducing these same kind of myths that would bring you in towards guild dynamics, towards the domains of progress,
They have no.
it's going to seem foreign.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, that's the observation that was made so many years ago as to why Portal Mountain became its own offshoot of. Initially, it was Buddhism, but labels are kind of moot. It's
Mhm.
any ism is an attempt to recuperate the commodity that is being offered on the table.
Mhm.
So avoiding that little problem space.
And credit to Buddhism reacting to this divergence, right? And the axial religions, they all tried to deal with this divergence of the myth into for its own sake civilization.
Both Buddhisms and Portal Mountain can take a slight bit of flack for the one reason, in that they can only really emerge in the middle class space. Because the time that's required into assessing this problem space and the
So-
ability to put time into it is
That-
actually quite constricted by financial responsibilities.
That's a good observation. That's a limit to our capacity, our power with this model that we use. In that many people grinding at the bottom end of the ego stacks, warring against each other, they will often become enlightened, quote unquote. And just even warring against famine and all this kind of stuff, they kind of just let go and, hey,
Yeah.
I'm alive.
It doesn't help them any that you and I, for example, where's the other picture? It doesn't help a lot of people in a sense that you and I tend to sit in a space where we're more likely to do a revolution than send people off to. And because of that, we have the capacity to send people off to do our battles for us. All right, it doesn't help.
Yeah,
that,
make this product. Here's the money.
that you and I are sitting here, essentially revolutionizing things sideways,
No.
while having the resources to throw flag back at the bottom.
sideways class-wise, and
Right.
I think this is probably a very common kind of trope or
Well, this is
criticism, if you will, of any kind of bourgeois activity.
Yeah,
is that you're
this is for
privileged
sure.
as fuck to even be able
This
to
is
just
for
sit here
sh-
and talk about it.
This is for sure a part and parcel of the difficulty with our presentation,
Right.
in that it is sitting there, and because it's sitting there, it has that potential capacity to be, quote unquote, as charlatanian as the rest of them.
So,
Again, what we put on the table that isn't being offered by contemporary offers, if you will, of modeling mental things, is that this is modeled. This pitfall is has to be
Aware of.
accepted is part of the very model that's being sold to you. So if you were to
Right.
actually believe us, if you were to take us on faith, if you will, the whole soundbite to allow feedback and whatnot, this element of it, that fact that we two people that are sitting here are in fact trapped in that ego stack. So literally, it's kind of almost the selling point and the elevator pitch in and itself in the same breath. The people speaking to you, if we were at all serious about presenting this to you, would have to look at what we're presenting to you, see where we are in that presentation, and reflect back also that this is the consequence of us being there. And so this is the example of us taking it to the serious extent that we are, in that we were
Consequence of us being there.
consequence of being on the same spectrum, rather than simply saying, "Oh, this is where you people are at,
Right.
and we're so different."
Yes.
Blah blah blah. This is not the case. What
I
we're
see.
saying in this case is that, with the observational power that this thing we are having faith in presents this position to us as us being more on the revolution side than the war side, which means we are privileged to some extent in being able to write off our non-immediate problems onto other people. The very model that we're offering to you says that we are not away from taking advantage of and being part and parcel of the very thing we're griping about.
And yet, here we are, literally dedicating our lives to this cause.
Well,
Like-
this is the acknowledgement of the soul and the zeitgeist that there is a neglect and there is something to be done about this space that is not that for all other intents and purposes being recuperated farther back into the system.
So we've modeled it. By that, we could say that we understand that this ego stacking phenomenon is from, let's say, the Western world to the not Western world, in which our body and our organs are the rest of the world, which we can take resources from and all that kind of stuff. But the way this is going to change is not maybe through warring people figuring out how to get together, but at a higher level.
It isn't going to be from challenge, because if you'll notice that even the guild interaction, the way I've tried to push towards, is that the interaction happens at war, and in the war there is a slight side channel that has the potential to it. So even in the
for the Christmas miracle.
Yeah. So even in the very, very approach in the interaction between guild and system, the guild never actually negates or what do you call it?
Right. Okay.
Disqualifies the operational
I'm
elements.
seeing a different angle here.
Okay.
So what I was gonna say is that, okay, yes, we're privileged and all that, and the mind has to kind of change its mind. So the upper stratum of society has to kind of change its mind. But that's not true. That's what
That's what reform does.
That's what Rush said. Rush, the song Rush, the band Rush.
I know the band. I don't know their music.
He's saying, like, in one of the lyrics, very popular, it's like, the upper man must change his ways first before the world can change. But I don't think this is true.
No, and this diagram will show you why not.
And
because the further you're away,
you're less motivated to even do that.
The more reformed you are,
so,
the less you are at the bottom doing war.
And yes, completely separated from it. So we, as trying to say, okay, let's get together the elite and change our mind together or something. this is a fundamentally potentially disconnected thing, and I've talked about this as guild networking, right? Where you kind of have the so-called elite
Okay.
people get together.
Elite is a valid archetype in model speak. The elite, the upper class, the owner. The owner is the separated ego up at the top that you see in this diagram.
Right.
The owner is up at the top, and the only thing that the owner is capable of doing is rearranging who owns what.
Right.
So their function is effectively fucking nothing.
So I have to kind of see myself near the lower end of this.
Well, no. To understand this diagram from a perspective of like I can actually take the time and see and think about these things like we have the privilege to, you have to see yourself.
Barely.
Yeah,
in some
you have to
cases,
see
yeah.
yourself as left or right, if you want political division over here.
Right.
You have to see yourself as one of these squares just before the break apart at the bottom. So you're
Okay.
resting on some people to do the work for you.
Right.
And then those people are
Right.
your managers that
Right.
will send
And
off the.
So I just wanted to kind of
You're the pseudo father.
Give
This
it-
is the pseudo father spot.
give a shout out, I guess, to all the people who have awakened to the crisis of meaning in our world, and have almost quote unquote sacrificed their lives, dedicated their lives to doing something about it,
Yeah.
and they
So-
put themselves in a war
so-
position.
So
of
in this
disintegration.
in this picture, for example, your mind could be the big ego, and your body could be the disintegration
Right.
that you send off into war
Right.
to fight other people for your ideals or whatever.
Right. Yeah, so I think it's important not to see a big separation between the, let's say, quote unquote, people privileged to think about this stuff, and those who are literally in war right now.
Well, if you look at this picture, the metaphor is right there. We are fighting the system, if you will, by sending words down the drain into the medium, right? To either
Numeralize.
disagree with, argue with, or project the artifact onto.
Right. I'm kind of
So
feeling
it's the same
like
it's the same interaction.
I'm kind of feeling like, what is our product? Like, as a business, right? Like the shell idea, that the guild needs to be protected by shell, which looks like business as usual, right? What is our business as usual? And how does that plant the seed? How is that the seed, right?
So
how do we make
consulting, speech,
consultancy? Do people want that?
conversation.
Does anybody
Well,
want to be
there is
conversed or consulted?
there is an entire transactional field just for it. So yes.
Sure.
What they don't want.
Established.
What
yeah.
they don't want is yet another charlatan.
Right.
So
That would
that's
be bad.
and that is a market that's been alive for 10,000 years.
Right. So there's a defense mechanism built up against that,
So the first product, if you will,
which
the first
Right.
product is mental, and it has to be the redefinition of faith. The very first bootstrap
the faith bootstrap, yes.
has to be the first one because, and this speaks right back to
Because anything that follows has to filter through that.
anything that follows has to filter through that, but it also follows on the assessment that a soundbite can undermine feedback observation method and move a faith to a truth via an algorithm.
Hijacking.
That's the hijacking. The algorithm says This is your faith. This is the truth.
Mhm.
Feedback observation says, take it on faith, that the feedback observation soundbite says, take a soundbite and observe its feedback. So
And-
it's a very different activity, and the only thing...
And then it
the-
will result in a truth.
What does it undermine, though? It undermines all other sound bites that would move you from faith to truth immediately, and says, no, 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 no. Slow
Mhm.
down.
Right.
And the only thing you have to faith
Okay.
in is in the feedback.
Right. And this is how to not be stupid.
Yes,
Here
moving.
we are again.
So moving back to what the point of this whole long-winded exposition was, yes, this is the ultimate prize, if you will, in that the what do we offer is first
So-
of all a faith, and in that we are undermining the concept of faith as it stands.
So our product is really a product that should help anybody of honest integrity to purvey their own system. Our product is taking the scientific method, if you will, into the neurological, into the subjective, and giving this...
Not the scientific method, feedback observation method, I think,
But that's...
is the more
I
appropriate.
tried to say it right.
I'm being picky here for one reason, because in that is the concept of faith, like for me, in that it makes the scientific method be a subset of
Correct.
feedback observation.
Right. But from the objectivist mind, it understands the idea of the scientific method. All we're doing is lifting that up into the subjective experience,
Right.
and that's
where
a
it's-
core product which helps anybody.
And
Never mind the Portal Mountain and the rest of
Yes.
our system.
I'm only
This
saying
is
that
a
the
kernel.
uplifting of it to that state is removing the concept of
So-
scientific from it, because you cannot scientifically do
Right.
subjectivism.
Yeah.
There is an interpretive horizon that simply
Right.
doesn't allow it,
Mhm.
and that's being objective about
Right, and
objectivism.
this is the horizon of stupidity.
right when you
Well,
no.
I tried to make a word.
Stupidity is when
the
you-
horizon of-
when you don't recognize the horizon.
The horizon about which stupidity
and then
happens.
and then you're bound to whatever to the spectrum, not recognizing that there is a horizon beyond which it flows.
Right.
So on the one hand side, it's kind of a trap, because of the horizon being a horizon, you don't see past that point to begin with. So no solipsistic query, no objective query can pierce through a horizon. It's again an element of faith, where you have a soundbite that you allow for feedback
Right.
observation method to stay there and
Yes.
see whether or not there is something or not beyond that horizon. And then you do that with templating methods, of one of which is the slowdown of resolution from spectacular to hyper, and then you map hyper mediation to the model to reflect the elements beyond the horizon, such that if they were to interact that way in your template,
Mhm.
does the feedback
Right, so
match?
in the hyper, having
Autopilot?
a map of
Oh,
what's
sorry.
happening below.
Right. So
Yes.
hypermediation doesn't allow you to see mediation, but if you apply the model of mediation to hypermediation, you will start to reflect it,
Right.
and by
Mhm.
by seeing whether those reflections work out in the feedback from the actual processing where you can map everything together. And this is the state that is normally called flow.
Mm-hmm.
Like being in the flow of an activity is that sort of a
Right.
mediation.
Right, and yeah, so
So-
it's a non-mechanistic apprehension of reality.
Exactly.
Which
like
is what we're getting at.
you-
Anyways,
you allow your mechanisms to appear, but then you judge them
They're
against
still there.
feedback
100%, but there's yeah, like a meta mechanisms happening,
to compare them
Um,
and say this is true, this is not,
which is
this is useful, this is
integral
not.
for avoiding, or not avoiding stupidity, but mitigating stupidity, because it will still happen. Anyways, let's take a quick break. I will be the one to initiate this one. Be right back. I didn't yet. Okay, so here we go. Come back. So I was just trying to like gather up so I think we've described a lot about kind of like the perspective of what's going on here with the ontological matrix and these ego interactions and all that kind of stuff, and we're talking about injecting an artifact via trade through war and all this kind of stuff, which is like kind of a side channel interaction, which kind of lights up something. It hooks into the zeitgeist of the other. Their soul yearns for this seed of something greater to be happening.
So let's
than just kill each other.
So let's imagine this whole platform that we've built up of ontological matrix of egocentric agencies networking together in a quote-unquote shared space, right? Mm-hmm. We've also covered the fact that there is an ongoing element of neglect that builds up a concept that we are referring to as the soul individually,
right,
and as zeitgeist collectively,
right,
that appears as a quality of emptiness. Something is missing,
right,
something is not right, so on and so forth.
Just intuitively know that there's something more. You're capable of much more than how you're treating other people.
Right. So this is the context under which the side channel
and being
artifact.
Right.
So this is the context for the side channel artifact. It right, is an artifact that is specifically meant to plug into said empty space.
Right.
That's the seeding of it. Now we're going to take a slight turn back to the methodological picture painting descriptor of what we're seeing, and then we're going to try to take that and make it more concrete. So bear with us. So this first initial insight, if you will, the artifact that allows the zeitgeist to be more of a foreground than a background. So a quality becomes something to focus on, which is where one starts to, quote unquote, deal with their soul,
right?
The emptiness that they feel inside.
And foreground, again, like the needle on the record player, where things are happening. Mm-hmm. You bring it into the foreground. This artifact, you bring it in because of the zeitgeist makes you feel that this is important. You focus on it, and suddenly this is more important than war in the moment.
Right. So that's the quote trick of the trade. Mm-hmm. So methodologically speaking, this event is a kind of like a small realization that the objective self that tends to appear like a solid object in the ongoing workings of this matrix. So you yourself has moved from point A to point B to point C to point, and you are still yourself and all of that stuff.
You're advancing up the corporate ladder, etc.
There's a point at which the artifact interferes with that perception, and it removes the objective self from the narrative, and sort of illustrates that the self appears in all kinds of narratives, and usually a lot of people will take that experience to mean that they're one with the universe or something to that effect. So if you've ever been in that circumstance, this is kind of what I'm talking to. It could happen
like
on
to
drugs.
See yourself as another.
It could happen on
like
drugs.
That could
for
be
example.
me, but more deeper than that. Like that.
Yeah.
That is me. Like I'm just this.
A kind of a breakdown with the idea that you're the first one to do X. You're the first one to have feeling Y. all of these things, all of a sudden you start to realize that, yeah, everybody else does that and whatnot. But the one thing you don't step away from is that everyone, everything, so you're still attributing these things to something outside of where they happened. So there's another abstract
Okay.
element.
So you're still having this ontology blowing around in your mind to
Right.
objectify things.
Right, and this ontology is what is normally referred to as source. So the individual self disappears in it because it's clear that it comes and goes away, and hence all the mythological descriptors of reincarnation and all of that, which are valid from that perspective. But the key to seeing why they're still problematic in that they're still things, and
Right.
Everything that we've been pointing to alludes to the fact that seeing things as things is the spectrum of stupidity. So to bring it all back,
To reify.
yeah,
See, that is reality.
to reify it all back, that is basically the point at which you are recognizing that there is the side channel besides the war in the exchange of artifacts is only step one. That in and of itself is not enough to
Right. So we're talking about the moksha towards the unbinding.
yes,
Different stages described by various religions.
the very argument between moksha and nirvana in days past.
Hmm.
So moksha, as the way we're appropriating the term, is yes, it is the release of the individual self
Right.
into a grander context. But the problem is that the context itself is being reified as a self again,
Right.
and that secondary step is still problematic.
Right. Still reified as like I am the universe, I am God. This is all me. Still a problem.
And if you-
still problematic. It comes up with problems.
And you might even accept others not behaving in a manner you expected as being part of it all, and sure, you're more forgiving, and it's clear that from from the extrinsic perspective that you're somewhat different, if you will. Like, sure, there's a release, but this release is an incomplete one. Not from a judgmental perspective so much so as it's just not all the way there.
You're still reifying concepts. Right?
Right, which ultimately land yourself back into ego war.
Now, I'm sure like the reaction to hearing this is like, oh, you're nihilistic or whatever. But the just because you don't reify something as reality doesn't mean that you're not paying attention and constantly flowing and juggling with ideas and experiences.
Well, nihilism is a proposition that
Probably the wrong word.
nihilism is a proposition that things in narrative exist in reality.
Okay, what I'm trying to get at here is the loop connected or broken? And when you try to tell this to people, they will say, your loop is broken, even though they may not know what the loop is. But they'll say, oh, you just believe nothing, or like you've completely detached from everything, and that's that, which is obviously
A reiteration of a
very
broken loop.
disconnected, right? So what we have to bring up is that loop, that yet always there remains things to be
It's
taken care of.
It's the idea of trying to introducing a secondary path onto a death circle that is extremely self-reinforced. So a death circle in the ant situation.
In the ant world.
They're very reinforced.
They're
because,
smelling their own circle and going around in circles.
because so
until they
many
die.
ants have gone through here before. This must be the
very
correct
powerful.
path. That the introduction of a new path is very, very useless, almost.
Right.
But that's the work. That's the actual situation that you're faced in.
Mhm.
Because the thinking process itself has self as solid object in narrative to begin with. And myth used to work through that by equating self to other in very, very different ways. Like splattering the concept all across the map to the point of where an individual self was the most meaningless association one can get from the word. Right? Self did not used to mean an individual, but self was part of self. Like the idea of a self
Right.
was meaningful in a very different way. An individual reifies the self as to be the means to the end. Right? Like it takes the self to be the
because you're in
object
context with
of
other
con-
objects and you need to get things done and do stuff.
So the mythology changed, and with that mythology change, yeah.
Hmm.
With that mythology change, the self became a thing that is solid, that is not part of the narrative, which used to be far more isomorphic with reality,
Right.
in
right.
which it was ephemeral.
So we're talking about moving out
Ephemeral.
of animism,
Right.
in which even what you could say is the self is a dance.
A dance, a reflection of other things at the
It's
same
not a
time.
solid,
Right.
as if you know the delineation.
It's not a thing. It's not an object.
Right. Right.
And
So-
really, thingness could be the very quality of the problem of counting. The ability to delineate one thing from another
Right.
in a set.
Even a set of one. That is that thing.
Yeah. So taking
Right,
it,
right,
so,
right.
so
Yeah.
taking away the idea that I'm
We
me,
went
you are you, and calling ourselves two humans would be
Right.
that.
And we went so far into this in the past live streams, I think. that
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to recollect. Before last break, you had mentioned something top down and bottom up, something about guild dynamics and the seed. And
Yeah.
like, where are we going with all this? Like,
So we've established where the seed belongs, where it comes from, right? We have the ontological matrix. We have the zeitgeist that gives us the interface.
the fertile ground
that gives
for
it-
the seed.
for the seed, for the it's the negative space into which we plug into quote unquote the positive artifact, right?
Right.
And so what
And this is what gives us quickly a potential, differential potential between destruction and chaos, quote unquote, not chaos, but destruction and entropy, and a sort of upward, let's say, return to the soul, to that which the soul understands to be missing. That we have a higher potential, let's say, to work together in much more better ways.
I would qualify this as like you've always called it a runaway civilization.
Breakaway civilization.
Breakaway civilization.
Yeah.
So let's imagine a civilization that is not breakaway.
Right.
Whatever that means,
That is not ultimately destructive.
that is not ultimately self-crushing.
Uh,
Collapses into itself by its own weight, by overdoing it.
that doesn't exist for its own sake.
Not a cancer.
That's something. Yes.
Not a cancer on something else, but rather an entire element of
Okay.
an,
this
another
is,
another being springing out of the tree of life.
This is a great concept to understand. That things are for their own sake. That which is for its own sake is inherently disconnected from the loop, disconnected from the tree of life. It's a
Death
a
cycle. Death circle.
soundbite supplied death circle. Things for their own sake end at that. They don't.
So to drive that point home, you create another language out of your language, but the way you speak it says nothing. That's the first thing that came to mind. But I have the idea of the ant death circle in mind. They've
Right.
created a language of pheromones, but the problem in a death circle is that that language caused them to go into a loop, which
Literal circle.
kills them all.
Until they start.
And so, because they cannot escape their language, they cannot escape the consequence of taking it into an
Right.
into a self-destructive pattern.
And the overmind, quote unquote, of that ant colony doesn't understand or is not able to communicate that what a death circle is and how to escape it.
Right. It has no awareness
Right.
of the overall situation, the meta situation.
So how to not be stupid?
All right. So, we have spent a shit ton of time talking about we have this ontological matrix and we're planting a seed and it's going to spread out imagery wise like thing. And so I've
One
mentioned
to another, one to another.
So first, mythologically speaking, this is what we call the first release, that moksha release, in that the very first effect of the same seed is to see everything as a whole. Right? So
Right.
the individual stacks of ego perceptively disappear into a mesh of one ego and a multiplicity of agencies
Is this a
and all of that.
participatory type of
Yes.
awareness?
Yes.
To see, well,
Just the basics, yes.
look at all these friends. They seem to be all the same.
Yeah, like
I mean, it's the same consciousness, whatever.
so this is the what. Then there is the how, which is the domains of progress. So the first step in the domains of progress is awareness, right?
Let's go through this. And we're talking
And-
about participation. So
Right.
a
And this
participant.
awareness becomes the awareness of the nature of the very same ontological matrix in which you're at. This is the artifact. The artifact says you're in a matrix of ontological agents.
Right. So typically, everywhere you look, you're going to see mechanical type behavior, and
Exactly.
there's something more to it than that.
Exactly. So, with that awareness, you develop your accountability to the effects of this realization. You
Right.
develop your discipline with regards to that accountability, so
And
that
we-
accountability is more stable.
We have the danger of the charlatan already.
And then the insight comes that you are not alone. That there's so
That's,
many
pretty
people see.
core.
Yeah, there's so many people that see the ontological matrix, whichever their way may be, whatever language they use to define it, as delusion, as ignorant,
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah,
Portal
yeah.
Mountain has its own.
Yeah. And we're talking
And
functionality here.
And then
like we're not
seeing
talking abstract.
seeing only the divide between those that see and those that do not, and looking at the binary more almost like a black and white, but not really, because you're from the black part in the white part. You're starting to see that there is a pattern of self-same repetition going on in this awareness. That's the insight, that others are aware, are accountable, and becoming disciplined through whatever level they're from.
Self-same
As
repetition.
their yeah,
What do you mean by that?
that you see you see yourself in others.
Oh, okay, yeah.
In that this person is also
Right.
recognizing the awareness, is
Mhm.
also moving into accountability due
Mhm.
to awareness. And now that you're starting to see everybody else in terms of awareness to the self, that's the insight. The insight says, who's aware? who's aware of this? And that's the first one, that's membership. Because now you recognize members. And you only see members
Okay.
in a participatory level or a membership level who also sees like you and can communicate. So now the awareness that you can communicate with others forms the next plateau of coherence.
Wait, as a soundbite, this is ambiguous.
Sure.
Like,
Sure, because it's not pertaining to any particular activity, it's pertaining to any activity.
right. Right. But I mean, like, as a soundbite, you can't say, "Oh, this is what leads. This is what qualifies as membership. This is the test to do this or that."
Right, there's no objective test to do this. There is only a subjective one to see, to that you move from a perspective of
Right,
I'm
okay.
aware of there's something
And-
great here to
and so-
I am not it's not that me that's aware that there's something great here. There is something great
Now-
here, and I'm aware of what it looks like in
Now,
general.
quickly, to put this into context of what we've been talking about so far, the idea of having war, warring and trading and all this, sort of versus the guild. This is the context in which one realizes that there's something fundamentally different between war and guild.
Mhm.
And there are people who are connecting in this way, which is fundamentally different from war.
In a way that's besides trade.
Right.
So the trade
right.
is explicit to the external world,
Mhm.
but once you once you have a realization and whatnot, it no longer becomes a trade because as a participant,
But-
you're no longer involved in the trading perspective.
This
you're,
is-
you're in the actual demand supply
Right.
side, in which you can actually be further. I guess trained, if you will, in the heuristic,
integrated
in the heuristic,
into community.
in that it's not going to be about that.
Taking back responsibility.
Right.
Um,
Volunteer your
I
time.
was gonna say
it's
that-
a voluntary.
I was going to say this is very susceptible or vulnerable to the charlatanism. And
Well,
all
yeah.
that.
This is why it's such a prominent element in the previous
Right.
conversation, simply because why it was important to point what a charlatan is and the relationship between faith and truth is that a charlatan will inject the soundbite to gap the bridge, and this
To
is
avoid the feedback.
and so we're offering a tool to weed us out as charlatans.
But you can't even be weeded out because the charlatans will recuperate this and say, test it for yourself, feedback it for yourself. And this is the fucking truth. And people will still get
The
swept
difference,
along with
okay,
it.
well, the difference then will be: are you taking this truth and working through it by yourself, or are you being roped into a community that accepts no one else, for example? Right, like where there is going to be a stopgap measure to the feedback, and should any such method, should any stopgap
Here's
be being put
one
out,
of our big problems.
it's charlatanism.
Charlatans will infiltrate every level.
Sure.
Up
There's no
mastery.
perfect solution.
Right. Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, like, it's just a thought that came to me. Like, yes, it will.
There's
all,
only
it will all
one-
be imitated.
There
It
is
will all
only
be
one
imitated.
defense, and that is to stick to the actual premise of observing the feedback. If the feedback does not match the
Right.
soundbite, that's where it's
Right.
at.
And as
so
soon as you're
that's
asked,
our test.
as soon as you are asked to accept or wash over your own feelings with acceptance, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
You should trust your own feedback and your own processes to determine truth from faith.
Well, with that comes another caveat. How fucked up are you? Can you trust yourself?
Man. So, what's the realistic trajectory here? Because most people on this world are fucked right up,
Okay, the realistic
And-
trajectory
and-
is
and-
to sow.
captivated by their own by our own systems, which enslave us. Right? We're all in a bad situation.
So nature provides again the only way forward, and that is to sow.
So
Spread seeds.
just put seeds,
Seeds, and
right?
it
By faith.
it does tread on the proselyte. How do you say it?
Proselytization.
Proselytization. Like with the charlatanism, the difference will be in the content, not the fact of it. So, if the seed says, "Am I a seed worth planting? Please don't plant me until you think so." If that's the instructions that comes with the seed, it's a lot easier to first drop your guard, yes, and I mean that is the
Right.
point. But the
Yeah,
second
yeah.
part is that when you drop your guard in planting that seed, you're not also what do you call it?
Mechanistically determined by some soundbite.
No,
To
you're
have
not
to do
encouraged.
that?
You're not encouraged to ignore the actual consequence of what you've just done
Right.
in favor of some story.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're going to be given a story,
So it's
but
a
you're
skill.
asked to compare the story you're given with the outcome of the growth of whatever it is you planted. That's the point of the feedback mechanism method and
Mhm.
tracking of it, because then the comparison is going to be the driver, not the statement, not any arbitrary
Right.
soundbite, but the actual functional
Yeah.
events that are happening right
Like-
then and there to inform you.
Well, I said Jesus loves you. That's all that matters.
Do you know Jesus? Why do you even talk to him? Did your father know him? Who is he?
Yeah.
You,
Well,
you know that article, right? That I'm referring to?
no.
This one guy that like talked to this tribe. He was
Hmm.
he was
Got
a mission-
converted
he
by
was-
a tribe in the Amazon.
He was
Yeah.
a missionary, and when he tried to talk about Jesus, they kept
You know
asking him.
Where is he?
They kept asking him what his actual personal relationship
this guy?
was, and when they determined it to be just an abstract idea, they were like, "Why are we doing this?"
Yeah.
And he's like,
Didn't
"I
make sense.
don't know."
And then he had a mind blown. But yeah, this is a perfect example of that soundbite motivated action.
hmm So soundbite, yes, but the soundbite is, please look at the soundbite and see whether the soundbite has merit. And at the same time, the merit of the soundbite is that there are soundbites. Are there? So on and so forth. That's what it means to put the feedback to the test and see what you're observing. The fact that we say there are sound bites that are feeding into this and short-circuiting this is something to be observed and then tracked and inform yourself of whether this is true or false. Now, the funny thing is that if you do this, then you are basically using our definition for faith, as it were, and
Right.
so in some sense it's a kind
Right.
of a trap, but in another sense it should be obvious as to why it's laid out this way. One last thing before we actually have to wrap it up, because we do.
Yeah, pretty soon. It's a 4. It's 4, but
Yeah.
let's say we got half hour.
So we got to the point of where we've implanted a seed into what we would call a fertile ground, fertile being the zeitgeist,
Right.
seed being the artifact, the model that says faith is this,
And
bootstrapping
what
that.
is that actual like in the context of war? Let's say you manage to have a quiet chat with your enemy somehow. what are you actually telling them? Like, we're all one person. Like, are you trying to convey the moksha to that this is this person, and then further and further?
You don't need to convey anything. This is not a concept that you
Just
convey.
well, okay.
You
but,
you connect on the fact that you are a part, are resonating in the same space already,
So,
and
so
you just
okay,
tap
okay.
into it.
Wait. So the Christmas miracle. So you are simply not propagating the war narrative for a second, just for a minute, and you exist as people.
Exactly.
And that looks to your enemy as, well, that's a human being right there. This is my brother. Potentially.
It's not even a reaction. It's the fact that they're both already are human
Now,
beings,
where do you-
and all of a sudden
Where
you
do you-
hear an element of that from the other side, and you all of a sudden the whole narrative that you've been told deconstructs itself into nothingness, because this is just
Right.
flesh and blood person.
And let's say you actually like have a beer with this person on the battlefield,
And all of a
something,
sudden,
and
you
it's
know,
like,
they
whoa.
have kids, they have wives, they have parents, they
Right.
have this, they
How can you-
everything you have,
and they want to
have.
go back to that, but they're here.
They don't.
They're here.
They don't. It's the upper. It's the
Well, I mean, like they want to go back to their families. They want to survive the war. So do
and
you.
they connect.
Okay.
And they connect on already.
So this is
pre-existing
probably
things.
too extreme a scenario to imagine injection of the mimetic medicine.
No, this is a perfect description of zeitgeist.
This is probably the perfect example to imagine the injection of the mimetic medicine. However, where the fuck does it go from there? Because these people are literally commanded to kill each other the next day.
That's
And so-
that's where you need the actual structure.
And so I think
And so once we've gotten the seed in, this is what I'm trying to get to. Once the seed is implanted, based on zeitgeist and the fertile ground, how does it need to grow in a way that does not involve it being sidelined like the rest of every other ego stack there is.
Right, and where is the potential for growth in the
And
middle
so-
of a war? It's let's say very fucking difficult. But in the middle of trade wars or like villages and all this kind of stuff, there's a lot of potential.
Mhm.
And I think that's where we can't talk about really the extremes of like literally killing each other the next day. Although that's a perfect example, because this is where you are ultimately motivated to see your brother for who they are in battle.
Okay, so let's assume the seed's planted. What does this look like? Because this is literally the last part of the conversation.
Okay. Yeah.
What does this look like? Why guild dynamics captures this space? So, first of all, guild dynamics, membership, mediation, networking, right? The fundamental guild triad
Members,
that
yep.
must come together at the same time.
Right.
So, at the very onset, what you have within that zeitgeist space is the very colloquial understanding that we're dealing with one archetype, with one model, with one guild to begin with. Otherwise, what is the zeitgeist is about? In particular,
Right. This is a reflection of the zeitgeist in a way.
the reflection of the fact that I'm a human being, you're a human being.
Mhm.
How in the fuck, regardless of all of our differences, how in the fuck can we be so different that we're warring? Like, your body does not do this to itself.
Okay. Wait.
etc.
Warring or not warring is one thing. Actually cooperating to create a society is like a totally different trajectory.
Right. So the zeitgeist, the more
The zeitgeist demands it.
The zeitgeist is an abstract non-thing
Yeah.
that just sits there as a quality, like an indescribable quality of lack.
Yeah.
Right. So, what I'm talking about is like the positive, describable element that could be injected into this empty space of lack to fulfill it.
Right.
What does that look like structurally?
The guild.
Right. And the
Yes.
zeitgeist is the thing that informs what this needs to look like. We are all one species, aka the archetype. Everybody knows this.
We're all
That
humans.
feels this. The second part to it is what is the expressible element of that? Right? The model. That's the language that we are using the space for. And the third thing is that given those two things, what does the outcome look like, which is the guild, the
Mhm.
hyperstition itself.
Right. So archetype model guild.
Right. Archetype model guild is already built into the zeitgeist.
Right.
So guild dynamics fills this negative space. Archetype, the fundamental guilds.
Right.
Model, the mediation guild, a set of constraints that are agreed upon by all members of the guild. And third,
Right. According to membership fundamental, all these
the actual
fundamental guilds.
and the actual people that fulfill the model.
Right. Now this is a blank space generically, but according to the fundamental guilds, those are modeled in a very kind of unchanging way. I think.
Mhm.
Like it's this is what we're kind of providing.
Permissive by default, but
We're
constrained.
providing the fundamental guild mediation membership mediation network. How to do that?
Mhm.
We're giving this free to the world, and this is how you do it. And it provided in the
So
model,
the
model
expressible
level.
part of the zeitgeist.
And when you use this model, it expands and it explodes to all professions and all areas of behavior
right.
as modeled according to ways which can be enacted and spread via the guild.
So again, this is the artifact that is
So yes.
counteracts the negative space in the zeitgeist and consequentially the negative space in the soul.
And that's a lot. The fundamental guilds, what I just described there, is a fucking piece of meat.
Mhm.
Like, nobody just gets it on the battlefield.
Right.
So how are these people going to get it?
So this is this is the whole idea of domains of progress. The first domain of progress is awareness, right? And the domain of progress of awareness is to simply state the fact that there is the zeitgeist, there is the soul, there is the lacking quality, and the very artifact that says so is part of the thing that fills that empty gap. Right? It's the first
Right.
element to say
And
to
There's something more
to
than
deal
this.
with it.
There's something more to this, and it should be easy to say.
Mhm.
But to proceed from there, oh, is that a doozy? Break time.
I'm good.
I gotta, I gotta take it. I gotta take a leak.
Go for it.
So, Burbs, So this begs the question: who is listening? Who can hear this message? Who can fucking hear it?
Probably just
Not the
us.
battle warrior. How does one side of this even get to understand any of that? They're not teaching their combatant, their enemy, how to
Well,
do
really,
any of this.
this
So I'm talking
sermon-
about guild networking. Where does it start? And we're getting back to classism and all that kind of stuff. We have the privilege to think about this shit. And who else is listening but other people who have woken up in these upper
So,
classes
I'll speak to
to
the
talk
privilege.
about it, and they've made their lives of it.
I'll speak to the privilege.
And we have.
The privilege of people who can discuss it materialistically, like we do,
Mm-hmm.
is sitting in that ego spot that gets to send other egos to war. We don't have to do it, and so that's the privilege.
Right?
The reason for that being the case is that it takes an enormous amount of contemplation, which means time,
Yes.
which we have available to us that
Some.
others do not. So it is a very privileged middle class kind of
Right. So to be talking like
Exposition.
the warring agents at the bottom as if they're going to be teaching each other. Are you fucking mad?
right. So
What is the actual unfurlment of the guild, as it were?
it's clearly a little bit more esoteric than the grind on the ground, for which there is more.
Right. So maybe Rush was right when he said it's like the people at the top must create the new way. I don't know. That's what he said, but
No, because they don't create anything useful either.
I don't know.
The only thing that they create up there is revolutions. They separate from each other
Right.
to throw their
Right,
underlings under the bus. Anyway.
And so ultimately, we want to integrate and transition with what we have. We don't want war, destruction. We want to use our full potential to move towards something better.
It's a recognition of the fact that we're not at the bottom of the stack, and with that, there comes some kind of power to being able to express elements
Power
about it.
and privilege.
Power and privilege to at least put out the conversation into the internet.
To even
Why-
have time available to make the conversation.
yeah, so
Technology disseminates and all that.
So this is not.
But we have time to create
none
the
of
conversation.
Yeah, none of this is lost on us
Yeah.
in the long run. It's just
So guild networking, where does it? How do we get together? Like this has been my intuition is that you have to gather
So-
the others, those who already
so-
understand.
so
are the
there's
the
an interplay.
primed? They're primed to understand this.
so there's an interplay. It's a process, right? So you sprinkle the seed into the zeitgeist, the fertile ground, create awareness. Awareness being that this is the way to model it, etc. Whatever, right? How do you proceed from that? From whatever sprouts on those seeds, right, becomes members. So you gotta keep spreading the seeds to some extent, so that
So
because most seeds die.
yes, let me say concretely. I know of let's say I know of like 30 to 40 groups and or people who have some kind of mission which is slightly or seems to be aligned with what we're doing. Do we give a message to them?
Well,
What do we
Here-
say?
what's
Do
the
we
gr-
send an ambassador? How does this spread out?
so
Because this is our fertile
so
ground.
one aspect of this is that there is a zeitgeist, but the other aspect to it is that the configuration of the soil, if you will, chemical configuration of the soil,
Sure.
will allow one seed to sprout, but not another.
Yeah, I know.
So the sound bites that
Yeah.
you're throwing at them, the artifact has to have a specific shape.
So tailoring, probably.
Right. Meeting
Right.
people where they're at is usually how this is
Exactly. Mhm.
termed.
So, in other words, an organization would seems to have a mission statement, a purpose, and you need to engage with that purpose. Otherwise, you're irrelevant. That's what motivates them. Therefore, you interface with that.
Right.
And
Because
each is different.
because they're not in a vacuum, right? They're on a particular.
Yeah. How can we help each other?
There is a momentum going on. There's a
Mhm.
wake into which you into which you resonate as well.
Right, right.
What's going to get canceled?
And which should be respected, because these
Well-
other organizations are established
Well-
and existing and have people, tens,
Purely mechanical.
tens, hundreds of people.
Purely mechanically speaking about it, if you're resonating something, and it's got a wave form, and something else is also being resonated into the same carrier.
Which lots of things are, yeah.
Well, how do you know that what your waves are not being canceled out
Right.
into nothingness or absolute
Right.
noise
Um,
as it's going through that?
so you
medium?
have to send the purest signal possible.
Whatever that might be in whatever that situation is.
Right. Right.
So that's
Yeah.
part of it.
And there's maybe assessment of coherence of different groups, of where you think they may be as to how you talk to them, how you communicate based on what they may understand, apprehend, and even understanding that the individuals
So-
composing that group can be different at different levels.
What I
right?
really want to do is have a quick spiel on the relationship between guild dynamics and the domains of progress. So
Okay.
I've already touched on the domains of progress as a means of seeing. At first, you're an individual, and then seeing that, and then stepping in through to the awareness that others have gone through the same thing, and now your awareness is based on the fact that you are a member of the group, if you will, versus being an individual without a group.
Are you talking about moving into participation from guest or
From
Guest
from
membership.
participation to membership.
Yeah, participation and membership. Yeah.
So what does that look like concretely in light of guild dynamics? Well, guild dynamics is a successive regime, if we will, of going through qualification, if you will, roughly speaking, getting more and more qualified in the model, right?
Mhm.
In understanding how the model works.
Right.
So it's a successive progression through the guilds.
Progression, yeah.
So membership can be qualified effectively as the awareness of all these individual guilds in which you are, in this guild you're progressing a little bit, in this guild you're progressing a lot more, in this guild you're slightly more, in this guild you're slightly less, so on and so forth. You're taking each one in parallel, right? But there's more important guilds to fulfill in the beginning, and then there's less important. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a lateral progression. So if you don't have, say, immunity covered, you're not going to be that great at environment. If you don't got environment covered, you're not going to be great at I forget which is the next one. I think it's economy. Anyway,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
point being is that a participant is aware of all these different activities that they can have for themselves individually, right? And so as an individual, I want to get good at this, I want to get good at that, I want to get good at this,
Right.
I want to get good at this.
Right.
Then you come to the realization that there is all of these guilds that must actually come in concert together to unify for mastery. And you're not there yet, you're not master. And you realize that there's a whole bunch of people around you doing this exact same thing. So it moves from being a member in a participant in each individual mediation guild to some degree to being a kind of for taking this whole thing as a project and developing yourself. Regardless of where you're developing yourself in other places. So everything becomes a picture of a coherent whole. So not only is the whole guild system stops being differentiated, and membership becomes less differentiated, right?
Right.
So this is the next
Yeah,
step.
yeah.
So the participant, in the concrete sense, will pick up this guild, pick up that guild, pick up this guild, pick up this guild. The member will see that no matter what they're picking up, it's from all guilds, and they're strengthening their strength, if you will, in one, but it's not apart from all the others.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Right.
it's the perspective that's changing, and so this is the secondary. This is the secondary step in coherence, in that you no longer see individual guilds anymore. You just see the mediation guild as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And your access to your network stops being about
Yes. Okay.
feed me
So
this thing, but
it's-
how can we do this
So the
thing?
perspective is, it's not about what I know how to do and what I can do, but what network I've tapped into and what I'm a part of.
And what is it doing that I am a part of? Like you and it are no longer different. Membership involves a lack of identity apart from the specific groups. You are your groups. It and that is not different. Mastery is
Yeah.
that. Mastery is that, but also with the ability to talk to participants who are not members. So it's like a member
Right.
who is now capable of not speaking only to his in-group, but going down
Speaking
below
the language of the individual.
of what was before.
Yeah.
And then using that to facilitate
The lifting up back into.
the full insight of we're all like this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so anybody who is able to tap into a participant and lift them up into membership is a master.
So I'm wondering, what like economic powerhouse is the guild? Like we have to speak in terms of, I think, power and economy, and how does the guild emerge as a powerful economy? Not helpless to the whims of the market and the system.
Well,
Like with these internal bubbles, like creating bubbles of guild activity.
this is why the shelter is almost always useful to manifest in the middle class, because it can start from a point of
Arbitrariness.
arbitrariness that doesn't require immediate survival.
Satisfaction, and like you're gonna die if you do it wrong.
Exactly.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
it has that limitation.
So what does it look like then? What does this middle class guild look like? Like a bunch of hipster groups creating.
It should not look like anything to the external observer.
It shouldn't look different.
No.
But
Like another business, like another
Um,
spa, like another entertainment facility of some sort, like a church,
okay.
like a
So then, like a federation.
yeah.
if
It should
you-
it
if
should
you
it should-
will.
it should look completely ubiquitous.
So you have a woodworking shop or whatever, but it has a badge on the front that says, "Hey, if you got cool ideas, we will hook you up."
We talk over here. We don't
Yeah.
just cut the woods.
Yeah.
Sure.
Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
We interface with the guild. So there's something bigger. But that, yeah, that how does that all work to a bigger system, a bigger whole?
Well, this is where the exponential growth and the metastability metaphor is for, really, in that it's when it starts, it doesn't look like anything. It doesn't look like it's growing. It doesn't look like it looks like a benign thing that nobody is actually paying attention to.
Right.
And it's in its ability to reach innocently and not without
Right,
the
right,
war
right,
interface.
Now,
The more the
I
so
I
it's,
agree.
it's like the surface area
I
of an
I
expanding
agree.
thing.
I
The more
totally-
it touches, it's like a black hole even in its ability.
I agree with this this apprehension, this way of being. However, I personally believe that this like kind of uh, zeitgeist is becoming so strong that it will demand its resolution. And it will say fuck all with the businesses. I want something that's specifically gonna
So
deal with the zeitgeist, right? I want something that's gonna fucking explode.
problem that I see, and this is just my observation of history, is
they
that
get
every time
recuperated.
the zeitgeist gets a response,
It gets recuperated.
it gets into a worst
Yeah.
version of itself.
Right. And which will happen no matter what. But let's say the guild is the,
And this
the
is
top
why
dog.
and this is why an artifact is necessary, because without the artifact, the next soundbite will recuperate whatever happened.
And you mean the Faith Bootstrap artifact?
The one and only. Because every other artifact will neglect the same premise.
Right.
And it's only in the faith that you
Okay.
cannot have faith in
Okay.
anything that
Okay. So the zeitgeist feeling it needs to demand something fucking happen right now is the one that pushes the Faith Bootstrap artifact as the thing that let's fucking not be stupid.
But also
How to not
pushes
be
the
stupid.
charlatan, but also pushes the charlatan itself, hence every major religion out there, if you will.
You mean is charlatanistic?
Yeah. From the perspective of like, things are shitty. We need a solution. We have the zeitgeist,
Yep.
but let's use this soundbite to solve the zeitgeist. And what happens? Oh, let's use Christ. What happens? The zeitgeist returns, right? Except it was quote unquote handled.
Mm-hmm.
And
Tough the situation.
And then if you're in charge, you're like, what do you mean it wasn't handled? You're just a rebel.
Yeah, it was handled. Here's the band-aid right here.
Exactly.
Okay, so this whole how not to be stupid. We've gone over and over many facets of this, ultimately coming back to this, the Faith Bootstrap and how to use it, which is our artifact, which needs to be injected, needs to be quote unquote, which gets injected.
And I guess our claim is that how not to be stupid is to progress through the domains of progress as
And-
the feedback observation method template.
And by progressing through the domains, we're implying a structure. So we're saying
Awareness.
a structure arises when you use this artifact. A structure arises which is not unsimilar to like an academy or a dojo. So make 1 million dojos everywhere.
Well, awareness leads into accountability, but fundamentally into discipline. So, awareness and accountability without discipline is not progression.
Right.
So, there's no progress if there's no discipline. with regard to
Right.
the awareness.
Right. The accountability through feedback should lead to certain internal sound bites understood as this is what discipline is. Yes. And this should create structures of like dojo like or academy like structures, right? So that's what we're talking about, is a bubbling up of academy structures.
It builds itself, yes.
And a federation of academies if such structures would communicate with each other. Right?
Not if.
As they do. They do.
They have to.
As we've observed.
It's in. The hyperstition is such that there cannot be a one-to-one. Everybody is in multiple institutions, everybody is in multiple corporations, and everybody is
Right.
volunteering for whatever demand there is. Well, ultimately, I didn't get to define those aspects of the guild dynamics at the end, but when we are discussing what the structure is going to grow into, the membership, mediation, and networking guilds are those structures that are planted by the seed.
Oh, yeah. True that. Well, we've got, let's say, 5-10 minutes.
5.
I think we've really covered a lot, and I still want to cover more, of course, as to concrete measures of where we can go with this, how we can actually plant the seed,
Okay,
and
guild
how does it
dynamics.
keep going.
Guild dynamics. Let's get into.
We need
Let's
good-
set this up. Faith, bootstrap.
Okay.
That's the seed.
Yep. Faith. Boots.
So the redefinition of faith is the bootstrap.
Of course. Yep.
Second to that, the dashboard.
Why?
Why?
Okay. Yeah.
Why the dashboard? Simple. In the establishment of the mental model through faith, the next step to all members is the recognition of each other.
And how to communicate. How
So-
to communicate.
So, because of that, the software, which is the hyper version of paper, speech, and so on,
Right.
is the actual product that we are going to develop in terms of like making this concrete.
Or developing. It's been already
and
years in the making.
between the faith bootstrap and the software one, there is a number of mechanics that we can utilize called the index card game,
Mm-hmm.
which is a
Right.
methodology of writing things down with an underlying structure behind it, developed to some extent by Brian. You need a particular space for it, exemplified by our table here.
Yeah, even just paper and writing. Yeah. Okay, so what you're talking about is projecting from this faith bootstrap in that,
Redefine the word.
and that's even kind of a tough one, but that any soundbite must be tested and all this kind of stuff. But
Including the very faith soundbite.
itself, and what we're injecting into that is an entire architecture of sharing and communing among these sound bites,
Which is a secondary mental model.
it's huge. It's fucking huge. It's software based. It's social media. It's all of this to project Portal Mountain and its fundamental guilds into the specific guilds of, like, let's say the Uber Guild or the Drivers Guild or whatever. You know, like, you got
Communities.
protocols for how to do this and that, and there's demand and supply for what is demanded, and what is supplied is a very isomorphic thing. described through sound bites, through such a dashboard system, right? So essentially a social operating system. That's what we're after.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, yeah.
So, in essence, 3 products: the mental one in terms of thinking, the physical one in terms of writing, and the social one in terms of media.
And how do you control the media? How do you provide that media?
So that's the software that's in development. Gotta go.
Hmm.
Go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, we hope, as always, that you've enjoyed our little development meeting, which is actually very big. We've enjoyed, as always, being your host. Much pleasure, good times, you know. And,
Is there any more beer?
oh yeah. There always is.
Is that empty?
No. Yeah, it is, but there's more still. So, yeah. So, I mean, final words, last thoughts, the last few minutes of this stream. Like, I'm thankful that we're able to articulate this kind of stuff. That I'm able to feel
Stop
you know,
being stupid like us.
satisfied in what we're able to articulate, and yeah, like this has to be bigger. That's what I'm thinking. Like it's got to be bigger, and I've felt like we're on the verge of a transition, a state change
Well,
in our own live stream for the last couple months.
What we've
let's say.
identified in this particular conversation is something very specific and useful, which is the hallmark of success in our end,
right?
and that is specifically is the interface of the zeitgeist to the artifact. Why?
Right. That's
at
the two
moment-
sides.
At the moment
the
of war,
zeitgeist being the warring having integral to the warring faction is the zeitgeist. The artifact is that piece that fills the puzzle that
That
of
negates the
meaning
war.
of meaning. Why am I doing this? What is the meaning of life? There's so much missing to what I'm doing here. The artifact slots right into that.
exactly.
Correct.
That is the most fundamental
Right.
element that we've been able to identify in this
Right.
conversation.
And the artifact is the mimetic medicine. It is the artifacts which precede the guild. Its specifics are ambiguous, slightly ambiguous, but we
Well,
have a
no.
model. We have a model to describe them. First off, starting with the faith bootstrap.
Faith bootstrap, yes.
Start with that, and go from there. Is that not true? Is it true that you have to test sound bites that are given to you, or do you take them blindly? One or the other.
And-
Which, you know, if you
Which
want
is
to,
already
if you want to take it
acceptance-
blindly, keep doing what you're
Which
doing.
is already the acceptance of the model, regardless of which way you go.
Accepted by the model, or what? Understandable by.
Don't worry about it.
Understandable. It's understandable which way we go, but as we were saying, like, war is not the situation to be dealing with this. Although, tragically, that's where people wake up, and they have no recourse.
The identifier is that the artifact can be slipped in the time of war.
Easily,
Only.
but this is also where people
That-
fucking die, and they're gone.
Which is
Right?
how it's eliminated.
In the most the worst conditions of life on Earth, that's where you realize the model,
Another
and
point
then
to
it's
make-
gone because you die.
Another point, it's not coming up in reform. There's no slot for it
There's no uptake.
in reform. There's no
The
there's
loop
no slot for it.
the
in,
loop is broken. Therefore, your higher commanders, they don't actually hear from the ground. They project down onto it. There's no loop, quote unquote, to take feedback from the war on the ground up to these commanders. Period. Boom. Loop broken. People die.
So never happens in reform, never happens in revolution. War is the only space for it.
Well, those are recuperations, reform and revolution.
In a revolution,
Band-Aids.
in a revolution, you got the middle class separating from the middle class, sending down the underlings. To do the bidding. So again,
Right.
the only feasible interaction is
The
war.
bidding, and there's some ideological separation between the stacks, which gets played out, and it has nothing to do with the guild. Basically,
Yeah, if you're just separating out from being underneath an ego, but still suppressing egos.
yep. So, granted, there's still a minute left, maybe. As far as incorporation and like partnership between you and me, like, what is our job right now? What is actually demanded? What demands are we satisfying?
Produce the software.
Produce a software which can help to connect people who understand this.
And we already
Stuff.
have faith. So
We have faith, but
the soundbite exists. The software will
as a
perpetuate.
product,
The software perpetuates the
So,
soundbite.
it's taken us actually years to really solidify on the faith bootstrap, which is kind of interesting. But the faith bootstrap is a subjective version of the scientific method, like internalized.
If you're not paying attention to your feedback, what the fuck is your faith about?
You're just doing what you're told. And which is very hard. Like, this, nothing is easy about it. Nothing about navigating faith and testing faith is easy. Like, there's so much ambiguity, right? It's like a iterative process, which you just try and get better and better a little bit, but there's no perfection here.
Why you would?
Like, it's ambiguous
Why
as
would
fuck.
you track your observations then? That's the point. You track.
To get towards something.
So observation means tracking observation means comparing previous observation to the next one. What changed? This is what tracking means. If you don't
Yeah.
track any of that,
Right.
you're not observing it.
And even if you do track, the observations sometimes are not apparent. What does this mean? What does this signal mean? Why is it deviant, or does it matter? Doesn't?
Well,
Or-
this is why you have a template. You don't just observe and track. You
Right.
observe and compare to a template. Hence, that you hold on to the soundbite. So the soundbite becomes a template.
a template of like how things should be ideally.
Yeah,
kind of.
your observations
Right.
are filtered through said template.
Right.
And then feedback
And
says, did it work? Did it not work?
in various areas, did it or didn't? But you may feel anxiety here, anxiety there, or
And
like
so-
the
and so
pain.
this
You
is
feel
where the
pain
tr-
here and there,
this is
and you're
where
like,
you
this
have
is could be investigated. That could be investigated.
And this is where you have a meaningful truth value versus a meaningless truth value.
And what a fucking responsibility. This is honestly, that's a lot to ask, but this is life. That's what people do. We are capable of this very,
How
very
the
well.
fuck are we going to go through life without that?
Well, yes, yeah.
What's the idea there?
To
Yeah.
expunge the soul at all cost. And with that, I think we can wrap this up because we gotta go. We got literally minutes to blast down the highway, and and be one with all the people.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you all for enjoying our live stream, as we know you have, and
And I'll be in your car.
we'll see you in the chats.